Good afternoon and welcome to the Swedish-British Summit 2020 and welcome to our live broadcast from London. Today we're connecting speakers from across the UK and Sweden, and we're now only 28 days away until Britain's famous exit from the European Union. And at times like this, it can be useful to remind ourselves of the long-term friendship and relationship between our two countries. And that's what today's event is all about, a celebration of what unites us as opposed to divides us, focused on outer thinking and 21st century leadership. It's about the world we see ahead of us. Those structural challenges facing us, whether we're businesses or society at large, and we're living in a time of huge transformation, some fueled by the pandemic, but in many cases, the change started well before this. Disruptive tech is changing the reality for businesses and workplaces, and the way we work is challenged. Reskilling and continuous learning is the new normal, and new generations prioritize very differently. Climate change and sustainability is no longer an appendix in the annual report or a nice to have, but a strategy for survival. Today is a conversation about what it takes to thrive in the 21st century, and our great stage today is shared by great thinkers from across business, academia, politics and media. Sweden and Britain can be great examples and role models, and that's why we at the Swedish Chamber of Commerce for the UK have welcomed you all here today. A platform for discussion and forward thinking, and that's something that we've been doing for over 114 years. Now I look forward to listening to all of our great speakers today, and I hope all of you at home will join in the conversation too and get involved. Let's make it interactive. And a huge thanks to our sponsors for supporting the event today. Thanks to Volvo Car, the Swedish car manufacturer going electric, fintech giant Trustly, the Swedish match brand Zinn, and the wonderful skiing and adventure region of Jämtland Härjedalen in the north of Sweden. Thanks also to our partners, the UK's Department for International Trade, the Swedish Embassy in London, the British-Swedish Chamber of Commerce, and Steve Edge Design. But enough from me. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our Master of Ceremonies for today, Nick Gowing. He's the director and founder of Thinking the Unthinkable, which sounds almost Orwellian today. But Nick was the main news presenter for BBC World News for almost 20 years, and he has 35 years of experience in diplomacy, defense, and international security. We're very happy to be working with you, Nick, and I'm leaving this summit in your very capable hands. Have a wonderful day, and thank you all for joining us.
Hello, welcome to you all wherever you are. Outer thinking, transformation, sustainability, ESG, people culture, huge leaps in technology and data. So easy to say all of these, but all of them are creating really enormous challenges which all of us are wrestling with, probably more than most of us ever want to really admit that openly. Outer thinking. There was, I would say, modestly calibrated thinking about new realities at the same summit last year, but I heard no voices thinking in a radical outer way about the possibility, the inevitability of what we've all had to endure in the last year, with enormous existential threats to us all personally, to our companies, to our institutions, to the stability of all we take for granted, to our economies and even our survival. I urge you, ask yourselves, why was I not thinking those unthinkables? Or more appropriately, let's use the word unpalatable, because there was evidence, there were signals of the horrors that were going to loom. I join you as in that Orwellian way that we've just heard from Peter, as the founder of the Thinking the Unthinkable project. But we, back in 2016, 23 days out, predicted that Brexit would be voted for. We predicted that Trump would be nominated and also elected. And we also predicted these societal threats from huge disruptions. Many people, though, said to us, what on earth are you smoking? There's no evidence for this. But there was evidence. And that's central to the kind of things we want to really get to in the next 3.5 hours. And it's the issue of conformity as well. Ask yourselves, is the conformity which got me the job that I have at the moment actually disqualifying me from appreciating the enormity of what's happening, how to handle it, and not just smile and survive, but also to thrive. So that's your challenge, to think the unthinkable in the next 3.5 hours. It's going to be an intense 3.5 hours. Be bold, be radical, and be outer. yes, we can turn that into a description. We don't have much time. Time is tight, so I encourage all of you to be equally tight, focused, disciplined in your remarks. Probably little time for too much nuance, if I may say. You get positive points for radical thinking, not length of contribution, whether in person or in writing. Now, let me introduce you to one thing. It's a QR code. It'll come up on the screen. You can grab it quickly on your mobile phone. Scan this on the screen to access the digital program. You'll find the full agenda and details of speakers also available on www.scc.org.uk if you haven't downloaded it already. We have 4 panels. We have 6 keynotes and fireside chats over the afternoon. An intense program, so we'll give you a little R&R. You'll have 4 to 5 minutes a couple of times during the afternoon to get a break, coffee, tea, orange juice, or just get up and walk around. So we're not going to be too draconian with you. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. We want interactivity at any point. We want questions and comments from them. Just type them in to the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If it's aimed to a specific speaker, certainly on a panel, then please state who it goes to into the correct basket and file anything you can from now based on the program and the speakers you can see coming up. We can then put it in the right basket. So let me now introduce our first speaker. Let me introduce someone who's a book based on value-based leadership in an ever-changing world, Restart. The agenda setter, Helene Barnekow. Welcome, Helene, Chief Executive of Microsoft Sweden in Stockholm, 25 years in the IT and telecom business, led the Outer Thinking Summit last year, and you would be where I'm sitting, Helene, if it wasn't for the fact we have the quarantine problem. So all I'm doing is keeping the seat warm for you. We'll hope to see you back next year, and let's hope the vaccines all work and make it easier. So I'm delighted to hand it over to you to discuss the summit and 21st century leadership, and encourage everyone out there to submit questions, comments based on what you're saying. Helene, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me back here. It's great to be here, even if it's not in person. 7 minutes I have to try to summarize what I think about the 21st century leadership. Last year at the summit, I left that summit with a summary of saying that we felt a whirlwind that day, and so much happened on that day, and the pace was so high. And yet the only thing we knew was that things were never going to move that slowly again. And little did we know that less than 3 months later, the pandemic would be over us. And it has changed our lives forever in so many ways. It has also accelerated. We are estimating that in 2 months, we basically did 2 years worth of digitalization. So 2 years work in 2 months. And that's an extraordinary acceleration. And there's a lot to learn from that, obviously. And for me, almost the most interesting question is, why didn't we manage to drive that pace and use that power of digitalization to reap the benefits, even without the crisis? And I really do believe that the answer to that is quite clearly leadership. And the digital transformation that we're seeing is sometimes coined at the 4th industrial revolution. And to become successful in that, clearly we need to embrace the next generation of leadership and the leadership of the 21st century that Peter so well called out for it. So I'll give you, I wouldn't call it a formula, but these would be my top 5 ingredients for actually creating that leadership in 7 minutes. The first one for me really, truly is leadership truly driven by purpose. And this is the time when purpose is not the corporate slogan any longer. It's something that is truly your compass. As a leader, you're ready to set BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals based on this purpose. Goals you don't know how to achieve, or to deliver on, but you know that if you don't set them and if you don't communicate them, they will not happen. You're also leading with transparency, and you share your own personal why. Why are you there? Why are you in that job? And how does that connect to that purpose of your organization? Leaders are here to do business, of course, and the expectation for this to turn into sustainable business will increase exponentially, and hence the purpose becomes ever so much more important. My second point is that this is about technology-driven and value-driven leadership. And maybe this is my most important sentence here today. On one hand, technology is the enabler, how we both fix problems and how we create and grow new opportunities. We cannot save the planet, we cannot save the climate challenge without technology. We cannot secure high quality healthcare, we cannot build factories, supply chains, drive innovation without technology. And yet, many leaders delegate this to a CIO or CTO or CDO, as if this can be departmentalized into somebody's job description only. On the other hand, the values you decide you need to pursue to build your business, your company, your culture, that's not the job either for your corporate HR team. It's your compass in full working mode this day. This is your responsibility as a leader to live by. And it's never clearer than that when an organization is facing challenging times as we are doing today. I am a strong believer that all of us as leaders need to understand tech to a certain level. We need to understand what it can do to enable our organizations and our ecosystems. And then we must connect that with the value-based leadership so we have the compass in place for how we use that tech enablement. I can only think of a few leaders actually who encompass both these sides, and I cannot think of anything stronger to stay relevant as a leader in 21st century. My third point is about living inclusion, and maybe this is expected from somebody for me to talk about diversity as a core point. And still, I think we are at a different place now. Driving diversity is only the introduction to what I believe every leader of the 21st century needs to really master. And that is to build a culture based on inclusion, a culture where everybody feels welcome to bring their own personality and way of being to work. Not just because it's the right thing to do from a value perspective, but it has been proven in so many times in research that teams with inclusive cultures far outperforms other teams. And this is how you really drive innovation. So extremely important going forward. My fourth point is about coaching. And it may seem like a junior manager task to train, but I don't think it is. I think once you build your culture on a foundation of your purpose and direction, and you work on attracting talent and all of that, you bring an incredible power into your organization. And after having done that, most companies are still operating through standard KPIs, corporate reviews, which drives a climate where taking risk is not sending signals that you should try something new or paint outside the lines. And I think this is exactly what our leadership needs to encourage. Of course, we need to create strong businesses, and we can only do that if we fire on all the powers that we have in the company, i.e. our talent. Therefore, I think the leadership needs to encompass that we actually drop a lot of our corporate reviews and we invest in ourselves in true coaching conversations. And that's probably the best investment we can do in leadership skills across our companies. And my fifth point really has to be about constant learning. It's to really build a growth mindset culture that gets manifested across the company. With the exponential times we're living in, and knowing it will never move as slowly as it does today, the need for constant learning is paramount. And that's not for the teams around you, it's for you as a leader. And if we can do that and create the culture of growth and curiosity, we can fuel the growth mindset. To really succeed with this, I think we need to dare to ignore hierarchies. No great ideas, innovation, new insights, or disruption came from thinking about life in hierarchies. It's an old survivor from an earlier industrialist. So consciously feed a culture where the questions are more important than knowing all the answers. Create space and time for skilling. Encourage meeting the unexpected and sharing this in your ecosystem. This will fuel your culture as well as your business. So to wrap this up, at the end of the day, we live in an era where everything that can be digitalized will be digitalized. And everything that is digitalized can be copied. So then the only thing that cannot be copied that we have is actually our culture. And with that, leadership rises as more important than ever. And it is a challenging task, I think, for us leaders to build a culture where our organizations are like super magnets. Somebody customers want to buy from, partners collaborate with, stakeholders to trust, and talent to come and work for. And if we can embrace this, leadership roles will not only drive sustainable business for our own companies and organizations and ecosystems, but that will be the best platforms to change and drive change in society at large. So with that, thank you for listening in to my 7-minute reflection.
Helen, thank you very much indeed. Please post your thoughts and comments on what Helen has just told us. Helen, I don't have any questions at the moment, but let me come to this. Do you believe, I mean, those 7 points you make are so critical, particularly on purpose, but do you see leaders who are really adopting this? Or is there purpose washing? Is there washing, in other words, in public, as opposed to acting on the kind of principles that you've just put on the table?
There is plenty of purpose washing, and I think we've been doing this for a long time, actually. I do think purpose washing will be more and more risky, because I think the world is looking at companies and organizations they want to do business with or be part of in a different way. So I think it is actually becoming riskier to do that. But you also see companies driving on true purpose and acting on true purpose. To give you, and I talked about BHAG, just to give you an example from my own company, where we put our climate as sustainability as a BHAG, saying that by 2030 we will be carbon negative. By 2050 we will have withdrawn everything we have emitted into the atmosphere since the company was started in 1975. We clearly don't know how to do that yet, but when you set that goal and you actually draw a plan and you work with customers and partners to achieve that plan, then I think you live by your purpose, and then I think your effect also on society around you can actually be very positive.
Let me just quickly ask you this then, based on purpose. The British Academy and the Side Business School are running a big program about the future of the corporation. And they've redefined purpose like this. Quickly, your response. The purpose of business is to solve problems of the people and planet profitably, not profit from causing problems. Do you reckon that will take off?
I actually, well, I'm an optimist, so I do. And we talk, I mean, more and more, even I was with the CEO last night and we talked about the actual objective, and you land on, to be very crisp and short, sustainable business. It has to be a sustainable business, and it has to be good for the planet, society, and for the business, for that to work in the long run.
All right, Helen Barnekow, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're coming back to join us later, so thanks very much.
You.
And I'll keep the seat warm for you for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Let's move on now to the first of our fireside chats. I'm going to go live to Gothenburg now, to Göteborg, to the president and CEO of Volvo Cars, who's joining us, Håkan Samuelsson, leading the transformation of the company from cars to redefining mobility. Håkan, great to see you. I last spoke with you 22 months ago in Stockholm on a public platform, and I heard what you've been saying and what your ambitions are for mobility. How far have you got? How far have you got to redefining mobility? And as I ask you that question, I encourage others to ask questions as well. So get on the QR code, please.
Yeah, hi Nick, nice to be here. Yeah, a lot have happened in our country since we talked last time, and we are really right now more firmly on our way to electrify our company. I mean, 2 years ago, I think we were a bit underestimating how fast electrification would come in, and we then focused on plug-in cars, chargeable cars, but less dependent on charging infrastructure. I think right now we are very focused on electrifying our company faster, and really we are convinced that the premium car segment is really going to be an electric car segment, and we want to have a very strong position in that. So we believe already 5 years from now, half of our cars will be all electric, and the other half will be hybrid cars.
How are you redefining mobility? Do people want to own cars? How will they access cars? Will they have cars which turn up by themselves? In other words, how are you changing the mindset of your customers and consumers? Where do you think, because you're taking a number of risks here?
First, I think we need to have attractive mobility, individual mobility. It has to be electric. Sustainability is part of the car. I mean, I think people want to have electric cars, but then something also I think will be changing. I mean, traditionally a car has been an investment goods. you buy it for a large lump sum. I mean, some people will still do that, but I think more and more want to have a very transparent monthly fee. You could call that more like a subscription. I think that will be coming more and more, and also with a looser commitment how long you would like to have the car. I mean, more or less as you rent an apartment, I think you don't want to sign up. People could still stay 10 years in an apartment or 1 year. You never know how your life changes. So mobility as a subscription, I think, is coming more and more, and then including everything. I think the days when it's very difficult to see what the cost is gone. Has to be transparent, all included. So, and then of course, I think also we need to be ready to offer this very attractive mobility also for customers who only want it for a week or a day or 2 days. And that will come, especially for big cities, because having a car parked, I mean, it's really a headache finding place every time, and expensive garages. So I think that is also a change we need to watch out for.
Håkan, I remember you talking about particularly the change of the mindset, not just of your customers, but also internally within the company. And that's what you as a leader have had to do. What have been the challenges of changing the skills, changing the mindset of those who have made their careers based on the internal combustion engine, to understand that something profoundly different is happening, and that's either the success or failure of the company in future? What have been the challenges for you?
It's really two. I mean, first, it's about, of course, having a clear course forward. So it's a lot about clarity. And it's also about daring to do new things. I think we often underestimate the risk by not changing, by doing more of the same. It's normally seen as something very safe and so on. But of course, that could be even more bolder than going in a new way. So motivating people to create clarity, I think that is really maybe the two most important things in leadership to enter into a new direction. But then it's also, of course, competence. And of course, people can learn new things, but in some areas also, I think we need to be honest and say we will not have as many jobs in this area in the future, developing combustion processes. And then we need to not to try to safeguard positions or job, but support people. I think that's something in companies and society we need to be better in. Help people find other jobs also outside the company. I mean, we're going from hardware to software, from petrol engines to electrification and batteries. Of course, we need new competence, and some can relearn, but others we need to find from outside.
How have you found the adaptability, though, of internally to what you've had to do, quite apart from the massive challenge of re-equipping and reskilling? Where have you seen the major challenges in a long process of reorganization, which has to be done pretty quickly?
Yeah, now we have recently, during this year, really more or less have around 1,000 people leaving the company, and we have during the last years, of course, hired 1,000. So there is a lot of new competence coming in, but of course, also there is retraining internally. Also, people have moved to other areas. So I think we are in the process. We have done a huge, package during this year. I think looking forward, this will be more a normal process. I think we need to see our organization much more dynamic than statics, where we decide that in a certain area we need to be 200 and we are always 200 in this area. I think we need to have more dynamic organization and more group people around special challenges or missions that might be for 1 year or half a year. That's something I think a modern company needs to practice.
What routes have you been down on your exploration here and your transformation, which actually didn't work out, but you had to try to make sure that it would work or it would not work? In other words, about experimentation at every level.
Yeah, there is a lot of, I wouldn't say we develop all new cars and then we see they don't sell. But I mean, of course, the concept and that we chose are evolving over time as customer preferences change. And for example, electrification, I think it would be very difficult for us to go directly from a diesel engine to a full electric cars. I mean, there's customer preferences, charging is not there. So you have to go over sort of middle stages. For example, we went from diesel to petrol plug-in hybrids, and now we're going to full electrification. It's also to learn the new technology, battery technology, electrification. So I think those are necessary stepping stones more than trial and error. So that's really that's really where your question was from beginning. The last 2 years we have really evolving on this way towards a much more clearer all electric path.
Now, one of the extraordinary facts is that you reckon, correct me if I'm wrong, that you reckon a car will produce 15 terabytes of information. In other words, are you learning already an enormous amount you didn't know about what people want when it comes to mobility and how they want to move around?
Yeah, we will learn more and more. I don't recall the terabyte number, but I mean, the car will be more and more data in it. I think something that is really central in car development is going to much more central computing model. I mean, we have a car which is basically following the old industrial structure. I mean, there is a gearbox, there is an engine, there is a heating system, and all come from different suppliers, and traditionally each one of them have had their own control unit. I mean, this is really complicated to integrate. So in the future, we will see much more software being bundled and run on much more central computing platforms in the car. That is something which is a really radical change in the car industry, which is going on maybe a bit under the radar right now.
What are you expecting when it comes to demand for your new EVs? It's going to be your XC40, I think, which is going to be the first fully electric car. What are you expecting when it comes to demand? Because clearly a car is an expensive thing. The next generation have a certain view about cars these days, which is maybe not that favourable. They don't want to drive anything which is an internal combustion engine. They may no longer have the money anymore. So what are you expecting? Are you expecting that demand will hold up? Or there'll be almost a radical revolution there, that people will not have a car sitting outside most of the day, but they will rent, they will get access to it, and it won't cost them as much, and therefore it's affordable mobility?
I think that is one aspect. I mean, especially in bigger cities, probably selling a car conventionally, maybe it's not the winning concept. We will have other concept where you have a car for a couple of days, where more people share one car. I think that's one thing to make it not just affordable, but also more convenient. But another aspect, I think, is especially maybe younger generations are not that fond of investing a huge amount into a car. I think they see it much more like a service where they pay for months with a lower commitment, as we discussed earlier. That is something that is also going to make this more attractive or affordable. But when it comes to the real cost of the car, I don't see it really getting more expensive as we electrify it, at least mid-term. And I think it would be unrealistic to believe that the market will accept that. So, I mean, if you look back, cars have been more and more advanced over the years, but they are surprisingly constant in cost. So, say 5 years from now, an electric car will probably cost as much as a conventional modern car today. So, in that respect, it will be affordable as a car is today.
Probably the final thought, I think, Håkan, what about the transformation costs, investment and so on, when it comes to you as the president and chief executive having to make with your board some very, very difficult decisions about investment without any certainty in a fast changing, transforming business. Transformation carries enormous costs. What kind of judgments have you had to make there?
Yeah, of course, but a bit coming back to even bolder or even riskier would, of course, to say, let's continue with our normal conventional cars and let's develop them further, which also would not be free of charge. So, but of course, now we are in front of huge investments. So I think as a company, at least for our company that does not have endless resources, we have to prioritize. I think one thing very important looking forward is also to have the boldness to say no to certain things. For example, the conventional engine business, we are planning to carve out and combine together with Geely, our partners, into a specialized combustion engine unit. That's one way. And of course, to get the resources to invest into battery technology and electrification. So dare to prioritize, I think, is important. And then, of course, you have to do things efficient and you have to have the competence to do it efficient. So I think looking a bit over a long time period, the investment needed to really make the cars attractive and efficient will not go up that much because we will stop investing in other areas.
And one final question, literally in a minute if you can, the issue of recycling and sustainability of everything that you produce, how much has that been driving a significant amount of your transformation?
A lot. I think that's one of the key features in a modern car. We need to have recycled material. And of course, also looking into the supply chain. For example, the battery production, I think is an area which has to be really reformed and improved. And I'm quite sure that will happen the more people will go into the electric way. But I mean, it has to be a supply really recyclable supply chain. Batteries, for example, have to be able to come back and be made into new batteries. I think it's a very important aspect of electrification.
Well, Håkan, thank you so much for joining us and sparing time from Göteborg. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I look forward to the next progress report. A lot of speculation about the ownership of the company, but we'll leave that for the next time. So thank you very much indeed for making time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye-bye. Right, let's now move to our first panel. We want to identify the real tectonic shifts which are taking place, whether in leadership through the current crisis, the sinister pandemic, the new fragilities created, the implications for governance and society as well, the societal upheavals which we've all been witnessing and experiencing with some fear, I think, sustainability and digitization. Always available to receive your comments and questions for any of the panels, any of the fireside chats. We've got 30 minutes for this panel, and I'd like to ask each of the speakers to actually speak right at the beginning. I'm going to introduce them one by one and ask them to give a minute 15 of the way they really feel about the profound changes which are underway. So now the panel. Let me first introduce Polly Toynbee, who's a celebrated left-of-centre columnist at The Guardian newspaper here in the UK. She was BBC Social Affairs editor and has written for The Independent, The Washington Monthly, The Observer, among many publications. And she is really distinguished, highlighting both inequalities and iniquities in our system. So Polly, welcome. Society and governance. Give me literally, if you can, in a minute 15, a pen portrait of how profound the changes are that we need to confront.
Cataclysms.
You're on mute, I think, Polly.
Never.
Can I just check are you on mute?
Sorry?
Okay.
Did you say I was?
No, I think you're fine now. I can hear you. So start again.
Oh, right. Okay. I mean, I think in this country at the moment, particularly this month, we are in the middle of a cataclysm such as we haven't experienced before. The combination of the coronavirus pandemic, where we've done exceptionally badly. We've done worse than other European countries. We've done worse in terms of more deaths and worse in terms of the damage to our economy, worst, I think, in the world, except for Argentina. At the same time, we face the end of this month, finally leaving the European Union. And that is going to be a great shock to us. I think it's only just impinging on people who voted for it, who suddenly realise how unprepared we are and how lonely we're going to be out there in the world on our own. On the other hand, there are some reasons for optimism. Britain will be hosting the COP26 climate change conference next year, should have been this year, but the pandemic stopped that. I think that our Prime Minister Boris Johnson is reasonably sincere about this. I think it is one of the things that he cares about. He's put up already a list of his most important points. He's apparently thinking about making our 2050 target much tighter, much closer. And I think we'll be a good host at a time when the world has heaved a sigh of relief that we have Biden as the new American president, not Donald Trump. We have somebody who is committed deeply to solving the climate, the heating drama and crisis. So that's a bit of an upside. I think we have a chance of doing better on the climate than we've done in the last 4 years, but it's still a massive mountain to climb. As your previous speakers have been talking about, the changes needed in industries, in the way we live, in everything about us. I think we haven't begun to absorb quite what fundamental changes we need to make to our lives.
So a profound upheaval, and you talk about it as a cataclysm. Polly, stand by for the moment. Let me introduce two who've worked recently in number 10 Downing Street. Mats Persson, who's working now for EY, especially on Brexit, the EU and economic policy, has been Director of Open Europe, also held advisory positions in number 10, working for David Cameron, and number 11 as Chief of Staff to the Chancellor, Sajid Javid. Welcome, Mats. Your quick summary of how transformative the current situation is, how much there is an upheaval. Would you agree with the word cataclysm, which we heard from Polly?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree to that word. It depends, I think, a little bit on what level you put the analysis on, right? So, we'll think of this in terms of maybe 2 or 3 or maybe 4 big structural changes. We've spoken a lot about sustainability and net zero already, clearly, and as Håkan said previously, that is going through, we're sort of seeing a quite significant transformation around that. I mean, we all agree on that. That's happening. We talked a lot about the technological transformation that's taking place. Some people refer to as the fourth industrial revolution. And of course, there are some UK-specific changes as well relating to its global trade and commercial policy and its relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, all of these are very profound changes. I mean, we all agree with that, and everyone agrees on the headline directions. I would say, in terms of how profound they are, though, just moving a little bit away from UK for 1 second, just looking more widely and more broadly, I think you need to a little bit be careful around, again, what level you put the analysis on. And I think for the purpose of this discussion, maybe you can think about it in terms of changes that are happening at the government level, changes that are happening in the business community, and then changes that are happening sort of amongst individuals and citizens. And I think breaking it down a little bit like that, I think helps to kind of assess how transformational they are. And just to give you 2 examples, if you think about sustainability and the sustainability agenda and the move to net zero, which is by far the biggest structural adjustment that UK is going through. If we take net zero and we take it seriously, the adjustments that are needed in order for this country to be truly decarbonized by 2050, those adjustments are very, very big indeed. And you see at the government level, clearly a very big commitment now, as Polly said. You see a lot of investment sort of coming behind it, linking the net zero to the recovery in jobs and growth. However, it's a little bit, I think, the jury's still out on how much of the business community will swing behind it, as well as how much individuals and citizens will start to continue, if they, for example, are willing to pay a premium for more sustainably produced goods in an environment where they will have less money coming out of the crisis. So equally with businesses, I mean, Nick, you mentioned the transformation investment that are needed for businesses to really move towards a decarbonized world. That investment cost is very significant. Indeed, it happens in an environment where they have less money. So I'm just putting that out there. I think it is, when you think about the transformation, it's quite easy to say that we are now going through, 5 years of change in a few months. But I think in reality, there are countervailing forces, particularly when it comes to sustainability, particularly when it comes to the tension, perhaps sometimes both amongst individuals and businesses, between decarbonize and cutting cost. So
All right, Mats.
somewhat a bit of a caveat there.
All right, Mats, we'll come back to that, particularly what you said several times, because it's very, very relevant to Polly's work on citizens and how the public is seeing all of this. Let's go to James Sproul, who's now the chief economist at Handelsbanken. Nice to see you, James. You've been there since early this year, but this time last year you were still in 10 Downing Street. So you have a background as well as chief economist at the Institute for Directors and also in finance and banking. So let me ask you what your quick take is at this moment on the scale of upheaval that's underway, therefore the scale of transformation.
Well, I think one of the things that's really useful that they do at Davos is whenever they ask people to look forward a number of years, they say, look back a similar number of years, because that gives you an idea of the amount of change that we've undergone in any particular time. Now, we can look back, I think most of us remember sort of back to 1990 easily enough, and think how much has changed in 30 years, where mobile phones simply weren't a part of our lives at all. And in all sorts of ways that the idea that people would be ordering maybe a third or more of all of the things that they bought retail-wise just wouldn't have been part of the daily life that people would have envisaged. And yet that's what we are right now. And alongside that, of course, and one of your previous speakers made the point, we had this huge catalyst of COVID, which has really accelerated a lot of these changes. So wanting to be a bit optimistic about this, I think there's two things that are really important. One is that the UK is probably the most entrepreneurial large country in Europe. We have an enormous number of entrepreneurs. If you look at something like the data put out by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, about 12% of people in this country are involved in working in a new startup type company. That's a really, really positive thing. And I think it's, just in the year 2000, it was about 6%. So we've doubled the number of people doing that. So there's a lot of willingness to get your hands stuck in there. It's not just a Southeast thing; it's across the entire country. You can see huge amounts of entrepreneurialism, from the Highlands down to the Southwest. We see here in the City of London. That's really, really big. And I think that about the trust really important is that the upheaval that we're going to be seeing is going to be causing a lot of people a bit of uncertainty. And you need a government that's going to actually help you go through that uncertainty. And that means a government that really has its finger on the pulse. And that's one of the things that, for better or for worse, that we're going to have in the UK. How much a more distant government is going to be able to monitor and effectively help people on the ground is a question which the EU, I think, is going to struggle with over the next few years. And I'm not pretending that I have an answer one way or another, but it's certainly going to be a challenge they face that I think we might have a slightly easier time on some of those transformative things that we're going to be facing. So I'm an optimist. I think as a whole sits in Northern Europe in a very, very good place. And I really look forward to getting stuck into the conversation.
Thanks, James. Well, let me go back to Polly. Polly, I think two things have emerged here: governance and the state of society, particularly in the United Kingdom. And given what you write about, and I described it as inequality and iniquities in the system, and the political background here this time last year of the Red Wall, which and the way northern constituencies particularly voted Tory, how much do you think what we've now been through, with the Chancellor of the Exchequer warning of at least an 11% drop in wealth in this country, how much is wealth going to play, or lack of wealth, or a hollowing out of the middle, really going to become a massive challenge for creating societal stability in this country?
I think it already was, and I think is some of the explanation for the Brexit movement and then the Brexit vote. A sense of people thrashing around who've had no increase in their incomes at all, stagnation for a decade. Quite a lot of people actually fallen back in that time. Great growth of jobs, which has been good, but most of those jobs have been insecure, part-time, gig economy jobs, not enough to sustain a family, rising numbers of people who have extra top-up support from the state in tax credits. I think that sense of insecurity, that sense of no forward movement of the sort that we've been used to since time immemorial, has been very paralysing, and it has made wealth and inequality much more important. James mentioned Davos. I mean, it's been interesting that several years in Davos, they have chosen to talk about inequality and to talk about inequality in wealth too. But it doesn't seem to have led to very much action, as far as one can tell, from the great leaders of global industry who are there and leaders of global politics. I think the relationship between Britain and Sweden has been very much the social democratic tendency in Britain, the Labour Party tendency, feeling a close sense of alliance and indeed envy of Sweden's long tradition of much greater equality and its social democratic roots that we have looked at with envy. So we'd like to be a bit more Swedish, I think.
But let me put another question to you, and I put the same to Mats and to James as well. But what about what people now expect from power in this environment? There's a big majority in this country, or there was until a couple of days ago, and that's now looking a little flaky. But what people expect power can deliver, they've had 400 billion of handouts in the last few months in this country. What is going to be the impact on governance and the confidence in the system which governs people?
I think it might be quite radical. I think what we've seen is the extent to which, in a crisis, everybody depends on the state. The state is all there is. And this government has stepped up to a considerable degree, furloughing a lot of workers, supporting both workers and businesses. I would say not nearly enough, but they have in a way that's very deeply unconservative, and indeed has a lot of conservatives on their backbenches feeling very uncomfortable at this turn of events. But I think it's quite hard to retreat from it. If we're going to go through hard times, people will still expect the state to be there, to support them, to do the best it can, to regenerate the economy, to get us going again, and to save people from the very worst effects of what has hit us all. And so I think you're already seeing a change of language and a change of attitude in what is a very Brexit-minded, very conservative cabinet, having to quite rethink their political ideas.
Well, thank you, Polly. And I should tell you, I've got one comment here from Mark Prisk, a former MP and Minister. What positive change has the pandemic generated? Mats, can I come to you, because you've served a Conservative Prime Minister and also a Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer. That phrase from Polly there, now policies which, because of COVID-19, are deeply unconservative. What do you think the profound challenge is, therefore, again, for governance and society, and what confidence the people here in the UK are going to have in government and the system of government, and what they expect from it now? Mats?
Yeah, well, as you can expect, first of all, I take issue with the frame deeply unconservative. I try to avoid sort of easy labels like that, right? I think I think talk about, so what has the crisis taught us? I think it's taught us the need to move away from easy labels and move into pragmatic conversation about what policies actually works. And the second thing I will say about that particular label is, for anyone who followed the election in December last year, it was quite clear that the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister was already having a very pragmatic mix with respect to the role of the state in people's lives and in communities, in particular how this was manifested in the entire levelling up agenda, right, which was all about reducing the gaps between different groups and different parts of the country. So this idea that you need to have a pragmatic, what works-led type agenda that works for the entire country rather than being skewed towards the southeast predates the pandemic, but of course it's been very much it's been accelerated to some extent by the pandemic because of the reason I mentioned initially, which is around the cost people sort of perceived economic situation and real economic situation. And the one thing we know from this crisis, various different trends we can discuss, but the one thing we know for sure is that people will come out of it and the majority will have less money probably than going into the crisis. So there is that cost element. So to your question then, what does it mean? Well, I think, I agree the role of the state is interesting to look at now coming out of the crisis, but I would answer the question a little bit differently. I would say if you think about the support schemes in place, for example, and the furlough scheme is the most significant one, costing about $1 billion a week potentially, propping up, I think 10.3 million people in the UK, or 10.3 million jobs in the UK at its peak, which is an enormous program. More generous, actually, incidentally, than the Swedish equivalent, the whole varslingsystemet, as you know, Swedish speakers. So I think that's very, very. But what I say is, I think what the government now needs to do, and also in terms of meeting people's expectations, is to move away from supporting the jobs and the company. A lot of them that kind of are struggling, maybe to sort of make it through, because we talk about the concept of zombie companies and zombie jobs. If these jobs are not sustainable or long-term, medium-term prospectus jobs, then I think the state and the government needs to move to supporting the individual, particularly with respect to retraining and upskilling. So
but can I just jump in, Matt?
Yeah,
Matt,
so that's the key switch, right?
I'm paraphrasing Polly here, but she is saying very clearly there are going to be deep scars if there is no government intervention or limited government intervention. Is that, in your view, and you were working for the Chancellor of the Exchequer until he had an unfortunate experience and had to leave, but would you, if you were in the Treasury as a special advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, be saying we've got to keep this going in the way that Polly has been saying, in order to be sure there's at least the possibility of creating some level of equality, some level of wealth for those who are deeply suffering as a result of this crisis?
What I'm saying is, I think there is a definite role for the government to continue the interventionist policies with support schemes. But I think the nature of the support, we're not talking about overall amount only, right? We're talking about the nature of the support needs to switch from, if we talk about the jobs challenge, which is a real challenge, right? Unemployment, according to OBR, might peak in Q2 next year at 7.5%, 7.7%. Still better than a lot of continental countries, but for this country, bad unemployment figures, and it could go beyond that. What I'm saying in terms of dealing with that challenge, the nature of the support should go from, for example, furlough support to retraining support. So still significant money and investment, but in equipping people who have been struggling and have been hit by the crisis, equipping them to enter back into labor market or to readjust in the labor market. So to me, it's more like a retraining and a skills investment, docking with the skills challenge this country, rather than continue with furlough type investment.
All right.
Well, a role for the government, but the nature of investment is very important here, rather than an overall headline figure.
Right,
so I would recommend support.
Let me put that to Polly in a moment, because I want to just hear from James. What's your view, as someone now working as a chief economist in a significant Swedish bank based in the United Kingdom, about governance and society, the points that Polly has just made? James.
Clearly, I think the governance, and what you want, of course, is that people to have faith, and that faith in that government is down a lot to, is the government seen as being honest, is the government explaining things to people? When the government comes out and says to people and explains to them, this is why we're making the decisions, and I'm not saying the present government's always gotten this right. I don't think governments across Europe or America have always gotten this right, but it's all a lot of people learning. But when you explain to people, this is why we're making the following decisions, these are the pressures that we're under, and here's the responses we're taking, well, then that's that you get greater buy-in to the programs and the plans that you're putting forward. I would like to pick up also on one of the things you're saying. People talk about sustainability. I think there's an enormous need to also have sustainable finances. And that's something that a lot of countries across Europe don't always have. But that is both a sustainable long-term level of taxation, raising a lot of money in tax. We're the top end of where we are as far as tax as a percentage of GDP in the UK, certainly historic norms. We've also got the expectation of money. So we've got to find a balance there. And that balance in the idea of continually in the UK import capital from the rest of the world to sustain our standard of living, I don't think that's sustainable. And that may well be coming under some degree of pressure long term. If I can, just one other point you raised, Nick, that I thought was really interesting, positive things that the pandemic might have brought about. And here I'll both point to one in the private sector and one in the public sector. I think that the long-term determinant of whether society is going to be successful is how agile they are. And we've seen different parts of both the public and private sector over the last few months being really very agile indeed. And obviously we had at the outset, supermarkets had to quickly find alternative supplies for everything from loo roll to fresh food and they did. And the NHS equally. When it first started, they were a bit sclerotic in some of their responses, but very quickly people learned it's about getting the services to the front line. How are we going to do that? And when you empower those managers, as opposed to sort of the top-down bureaucracy, you end up with some really, really good solutions that come through. So if you ask me, what do I think is the most positive thing to come through from this pandemic? It's the empowerment of individuals on the ground to get delivering, whether that be through delivering your supermarket groceries, to delivering NHS services, to delivering all sorts of other goods and things that we want to lead our lives. So that's, to me, is the positive thing.
Polly, I thought when I heard from Matt, I couldn't see you at that time, when you said we've got to move from furlough to retraining to reskilling. And there are those who say that many in the next generation are going to have 12 different jobs. Are we going to see a fundamentally different approach to work and jobs in this country? Is there going to be a willingness to reskill? Will there be that capacity at the rate that's needed now?
Well, there has been an explosion in people doing different things, but mostly it's been lower paid and not such good jobs. There hasn't been an explosion in good jobs. Skills, absolutely, he's completely right. Unfortunately, we've seen the decimation of skills. Further education colleges downgraded, less money than schools have, no attention paid really to what politicians keep promising. You know, we will have a German-style system where technical education is treated with respect and the same status, and children, according to their skills, can take a path other than the academic path, all of which is good ideas, but very little sign of it. Our numbers of apprenticeships have dropped like a stone in the last 2 years. We are well behind a lot of other countries in terms of that agenda, but he's dead right that the future in the end depends on our ability to produce the people we're going to need for new industries of all kinds. And we waste an awful lot of time and money on pushing children through courses that are not necessarily suited to them and that are very badly underfunded.
We've got about 5 minutes to run. Let me give you another question that's come in. Isn't the problem we experience a consequence of the structures we've built in society, as well as our design of globalization? That from Bengt Skarstrom, Mats and James. We've got a hangover from the way the system is designed, which means that it's not nimble enough. Mats?
Well, that's quite difficult to know with that question what to zoom in on, but depends on how we define system and whose system. If you take, Nick, I don't know. That question needs to be specified a bit more, I think.
Yeah, well, I can't second guess what Bengt is saying. Isn't the problem we experience a consequence of the structures we built? In other words, it's difficult to change at the speed that is necessary to literally revolutionize the system we're saddled with at the moment. I'm interpreting.
Okay, so let me. Yeah,
James, you come in there.
Yeah, I mean, I can see in one way that you could be frustrated with the structure of the system we've got today. At the same time, people respond to incentives that they've got, and those incentives can be their, regulation or taxation or all sorts of different ways that the market signals that they might be getting. I think what we would want is to have, if we've got the freer the market, the more the underlying structures are able to move quickly and rapidly towards new forms of the way that all of us consume. And so we've seen in this pandemic that we've seen a huge rise up in the amount of online ordering. People have gone from about 14% to about 35% of retail sales. So that's a big change, and those companies that are going to do well are the ones that are going to meet new consumer challenges. And so when people are looking at the structures, the reason the companies were able to do that was because there were the structures in place that would allow them to do that. So the more that we say to our goods, our companies, and our people within the public sector, look, we expect you to deliver to the front line, and we're not as concerned about the way in which you do it. That I think is a way in which those structures, which can be frustrating, can largely be overcome.
All right, James. Now, look, Mats, maybe you don't want to pick up on that, but you will want to pick up on this because there are several questions here, needless to say, in the last 3 minutes about Brexit. And I need to therefore ask you, I think I know where all of you come from, but you need to make it clear in a minute each if you can. This from Daniel, for example, how can Brexit become a success? What does it take for it to become a success? Here we are 28 days out and we're still without the final agreement. Mats, why didn't you come in, given the position you took on Brexit yourself?
Okay.
You've got a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean, look, I've written more impact assessment on Brexit for the government, for think tanks.
Were they all right? Were they all correct?
And I'd like to remember.
Were they all correct? Were they all correct?
Well, we'll find out in the next in the next 2 months. So this is the moment of truth for me. Now, look, you know, as many of you know who listening to this, you probably have heard me talk about this before. How do you make Brexit a success? I mean, look, we need to, of course, get some sort of free trade agreement in place would be preferable. But look, I also think Brexit is one of several moving parts, right? And even though it's very topical, it is one of several moving parts. And maybe this also links a bit to the question around how we structure globalization. Because I think it is important that, for example, if you think about the UK's trade and commercial policy, of which Brexit is a key part, but it's not the only thing, that needs to link with and dock with other objectives. So you talk about, for example, the move to net zero. There is a big global trading piece there. If you talk about electric vehicles, what the EU now is doing with its own trade regime around electric vehicles and batteries in particular, I think the UK needs to dock with that story so that it becomes part of a battery zone, for example. As you can tell, Nick, I'm I'm sort of fudging the answer here slightly. You know, I'm sort of
all right, well,
treading very carefully. What I'm saying is Brexit is only one part of many.
Well, let me leave you to fudge in private, if I may. Just go finally to James and Polly. James, just pick up on this. I mean, this time last year, you were working with business out of number 10 Downing Street. Can Brexit become a success, particularly after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, said 10 days ago, I think, that he thought that Brexit at the moment was going to take another 2% off the UK economy? Quickly, if you can.
Certainly, Nick. I think that's too pessimistic. The government's own calculations, and I would concur with them, the Brexit, a hard Brexit, the sort of the type of thing that neither Mats nor I would want, it's going to take about 3% off the UK economy over the next 5+ years, which is to say, well under 1% a year. So that's far, far less than you're going to see as a result of COVID. It certainly can be a success, and it really depends upon how much the UK wants to engage with those higher growth parts of the world. I'm very optimistic about that, but clearly it's an open question. And you know, those who see Brexit as a very bad thing invariably see the future as being very, very structured. I think the future is very much open in the exact same way that you might see, for instance, a lot of environmental policies. If you see it as very, very fixed, coping with the environmental challenges is very difficult. If you see the world as being open and dynamic and us being a part of that, I think it's a very optimistic outlook.
All right, Polly, final word. Of course, you were very much against Brexit. You used the word cataclysm right at the beginning of this discussion half an hour ago. What's your view of where we're heading to and the impact on the United Kingdom and its ability, not least, to stay together?
Well, I think damage limitation, the least we can hope for. Both the independent Governor of the Bank of England and our independent Office of Budget Responsibility have said that worse damage long-term from Brexit than from COVID. And so it's going to be pretty damaging. Anything that's a bit less than their than their expectation will be a success. I don't think there's any chance of it being a success in any measurable sense. We've heard from America this week that that Joe Biden is not in a hurry to make any trade deals with anyone. We'd be lucky if we can manage to put back together the trade deals we already have via Europe. We've got one with Japan, exactly the same as we had before. There will be other deals like that will repair some of the damage. We can get back some of those trade agreements, but there is nowhere on the horizon, not India, not anywhere, some magnificent, wonderful trade deal that will compensate for the loss of 48% of our trade with, well, not that it'll be lost. We hope there'll be a trade deal. We've still got a few days to do it, but even so, will be very damaging.
Thank you, Polly. Polly Toynbee, James Sproul and Mats Persson, thank you very much indeed. I know we had to canter through an awful lot in 30 minutes, but thank you very much indeed, certainly for thinking from a helicopter rather than getting too stuck in the weeds. Much appreciate that. So now we're going to take a break. We're going to be back after 5-minute break, so please no more than 5 minutes, preferably 4 minutes. Coming up next, Sir Roger Gifford from the Green Finance Institute on how green should now shape recovery. And we'll have our second panel of experts on refueling the economy, being positive here and achieving sustainable impact. Please come back in no more than 5 minutes.
Zyn is a modern way to enjoy nicotine, tobacco-free and smoke-free. You'll never have to leave the moment for a cigarette or vape. Zyn comes in small white pouches in different flavours. Using Zyn is easy. This is how you do it. Open the can, place a pouch under your lip, like this. Wait for the tingling sensation and for the nicotine to release. For maximum enjoyment, use minimum 5 minutes up to an hour. Put the used pouch in the top lid compartment. Now you can enjoy nicotine without smoke.
Wearing a seatbelt is a terrible idea.
Mate, it's a terrible, terrible idea. They're calling it a violation of human rights.
For me, it saved my life.
That wasn't the day to die, basically.
Welcome back to the Swedish-British Summit on 21st Century Leadership, Outer Thinking. Remember, you can get the digital programme if you want to check out what is coming next at scc.org.uk. I'll be joined by Gabrielle Melkvist from Dagens Industry shortly for the second panel on the green game changers. So we're shifting. Sustainability was talked about in the first panel. We're shifting now onto green, onto sustainability. And you can use the Q&A function for questions and comments as you saw. But please get those questions in early because none of these sessions is that long. Now let's go to Sir Roger Gifford, who is former Lord Mayor of London. He has a long-standing role with the Swedish bank SEB, where he's now chairman. And he has headed up the London Green Finance Initiative, connected to the G20 climate agenda, the UK government's Green Finance Task Force, and is now also chair of the Green Finance Institute. 3 weeks ago, with the City of London and the World Economic Forum, he jointly led a remarkable 3-day Green Horizon Summit on how to transform finance to think only green. Well, I asked him for his takeaways from the Green Horizon Summit. So Roger Gifford, Roger, lovely to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. But the reason why we're talking to you is the extraordinary impetus we saw from the Green Horizon Summit earlier in November. What did you take away from that? Not least the incredible interventions and the contributions being made, the real momentum we're seeing. How would you describe what we saw?
Nick, it was very nice to see you again and very nice to be part of this Swedish Chamber Business Day. Fantastic that you're doing it, Swedish Chamber, and well done, Peter, for organising the whole thing. I think that particular summit was probably the highlight of one of the highlights of my life, and I don't mean it in any kind of a overly hyperbolic way. It was absolutely extraordinary. No one can miss the interest that is now being shown in the whole issue of biodiversity loss and energy transformation. But for me, that summit at the Mansion House, where we had 335,000 live stream hits, no bots. So it means there were something like 40 to 50,000 individual people from 70 countries listening, just under 10 million tweets with the GHS hashtag. And I don't know about you, but impressed my kids, and it's certainly the biggest event I've ever had the honour to chair. But the interest shown globally in this particular subject is just extraordinary. And I think it's this combination of corporate interest, of governmental desire to see real change happen, with net zero announcements being made all over the world by some of the world's worst polluters like China, as well as those that are well up the technological curve like Japan, the United Kingdom. This is a confluence I've never seen in my life, quite where you have business interests, government interests, investor interests, all in the same space. And it was just a remarkable event. From that, I took away the world is changing, finance is changing, and people's determination is.
I certainly found it compelling as a sort of outsider, watching, first of all, the Lord Mayor of London hitting very hard right from the beginning, the World Economic Forum, but speaker after speaker having a very clear message. But my question to you, I think, in this conversation, Roger, is do you believe now there is irreversible momentum on the issue of green and green finance?
Nick, I'd like to take a slightly different angle on it. And I'd like to compare the revolution that we're seeing in renewables with previous product revolutions that we've seen. There's typically a 30-year incubation period when the product comes to market. The tractor, the computer, the IBM computer comes to market, develops under the radar, doesn't really get going, although the people who found it know there's a real potential there. There's then 30 years of growth when it takes over the norm, just like the tractor did against horses. And then it becomes an established product, which is then better regulated and sometimes better taxed, which I suggest the IT revolution we're at with some of the American majors. We are entering that third period. On renewables, we're just entering that second period. And it's that technical revolution that many of us can see real advantages in, when the cost of renewable power is coming below and still heading fast below that of fossil fuel, combined with government determination to get rid of fossil fuels. That's what's very exciting for an investor, and therefore it's very exciting for any banker, or any financier, I should say, to look at this and think, how do we harness this revolution? And at the same time, it seems to be doing good. So I think the irreversibility of it is partly a lot down to the technology, as well as governmental desire to see a cleaner, better world.
But is everyone in finance committed at the moment? Do they really get it? Because there was one report from KPMG Eversheds, it was about the UK, saying only 25% of board directors really understand the enormity of what is happening and therefore what they have to do.
Well, I would say, if you'd said that question 2 years ago, it would probably been 10%. And if you said it 5 years ago, it would have been practically zero. In the United Kingdom, I think in Sweden, there's been a very much for much longer. I think the every country is on a journey, and Sweden is extremely impressive in this regard. I'm sorry, I have to say to everybody who's not Swedish out there, they are. When you look at, for instance, the revolution there's been in home heating, the government's desire in the United Kingdom was to replace 26 million gas boilers in the United Kingdom within a 20-30 year period. Sweden's done that journey, and the journey of carbon reduction versus cost efficiency and fuel efficiency has been remarkable. And it's that kind of revolution which has happened, which we need to see happening here. And I think more and more people are understanding that. The opportunities in the automobile industry, the opportunities in manufacturing for getting a lower cost of carbon, lower cost of fuel, are very, very real. And I think increasingly, if you ask the same question of KPMG in another 2 years, you'd find that level is up at 60, 70%, because nobody that I speak to is unaware of that something is happening.
But are you still seeing waverers? Are you still seeing waverers and those who are really dragging their feet, who don't really quite get it, believe that it's something which will happen maybe for the next generation or their successors, as opposed to the need for it now?
Actually, I don't. I really don't. And again, if you'd asked that question 2 years ago, I might have said, yeah, it's a bit slow taking up. It's a bit of a niche business. But, you know, the environmentalists have won. This is not a discussion that really needs to be had, certainly not with government. Every single one of the bits of UK government, from BEIS, the Treasury, the DEFRA, the DIT, are all speaking the language of green finance. Their procurement policies are changing to make sure that they have the right products coming on board, because there's a reputational risk there if they don't. And I mean, I know I'm being slightly hyperbolic about this. On the edge, you said I should be, Nick, but I really believe it is at that stage of tipping where we will not in the future tolerate waste, pollution, the overuse of plastics, the pollution of the seas that we've seen. I think the British public is very much changing its mind, or has changed its mind. It wants to be in the right place, hasn't got all the tools to do it yet, but the opportunities are there.
But your chief executive at the Green Finance Institute, Rhian Mary Thomas, made very clear in her intervention that there needs to be a lot of education, a lot of reskilling of the finance sector to understand it is not about finance, it's only about green finance now. But many are ill-equipped, to use her own language.
Yeah, I mean, again, one has to disentangle what we mean by green finance a little bit. I mean, the UK, for instance, with the building of many, many, many wind farms during the past 10 years, has been doing a lot of green finance. They haven't specifically labelled it green, which means that it hasn't got the separate accreditation and ongoing accounting to prove that it's actually doing that it's actually green finance. But a lot of finance for green projects has been done. So I think some question why you have to have that labelling. If you're building something that's obviously beneficial to the environment or beneficial from a carbon point of view, why do you have to build it green and go through that process? And the answer to that is it's what the investors are demanding. And one must not forget, all of this is driven by the investment community. The investment community want X trillion dollars worth of ESG-related assets, environmental, social governance assets, and that is only on the increase. And therefore, we need much more product, which is the banker's opportunity, more product, which is labelled green, in order to fulfil that demand from investors. And that's really what's driving a lot of the green finance discussion we're having.
But she was making very clear that what maybe got you your job now is not necessarily what will take you forward as a financier in the green environment, saying there has to be reskilling for up to 2 million in the finance business, simply because they haven't yet fully got their heads around the enormity, but the necessity as well, Roger.
Absolutely right. It's exactly where you and I were, Nick, 20 years ago with the fax machine. When we were given our very first computers and we thought, oh, crikey, how on earth do we make these things? How do I send an email? Because I've got to phone up on do you remember when you had to phone up on your computer to get a connection, and when it sang at you for half a minute before you got the connection, you sent one email and then got off again? Look where we are now. And I think that's the kind of revolution we're going to be seeing in energy and in electrification over the next 20, 30 years, not tomorrow. So there's a lot of reskilling, there's a lot of re-education that needs to be done. And no doubt there'll be those who still can't use a computer in 10 years' time. But there are going to be very few people who aren't faced with the possibility of changing their home heating from a gas to something else, because that's something the government is determined to roll out.
But Roger, you're talking about 20, 30 years. What about 20 or 30 months? The technological revolution is moving so fast. The expectations on net zero are moving so fast. I was at the London Climate Action Week with a clock over my shoulder telling us we only have 7 years left before we reach the total limit of what we can endure with carbon. In other words, it's almost moving faster than the natural assumptions of those in positions of responsibility at the moment?
Yeah, and this is where I find myself thinking, hang on, the globe has many ways of managing itself, and many of which we already see. I have to say my younger brother he's not a climate denier, but he's very much a climate realist, I would say. And we have long and involved discussions, long and involved debates about exactly what is happening and how the world can adapt. So I'm not sure I buy the 7-year, 10-year. Absolutely buy the long-term problems with climate change. I particularly buy the problems with biodiversity loss, desertification, polluted oceans, and land degradation. And I think that will be the next big thing, Nick, that you and I are going to be focusing on for the next 3 or 5 years. I'm not saying the climate battle has been won, but I think that is a stone that's rolling down the hill, and it is unstoppable. And we must all take account of that and watch what it means for our business, for our language, for the way that we conduct our lives, what we wear, what we eat, how we travel around. But a lot of that relates also through to biodiversity loss and where we are sourcing our food products from, our soy, our fruit. And I think that's going to be the next big thing that we're focusing on, because that I think is even bigger danger in some ways than global warming.
Well, Roger, let me get your final thought as we sit around our carbon-free fireside digitally as we are today. Just a year from now, assuming you might have another Green Horizon Summit, but seeing the momentum, what do you think you'll be reporting about the enormity of forward movement? Have a guess.
Well, our Green Horizon Summit in 1 year's time will be COP26. And this Green Horizon Summit was timed to exactly coincide. When I set the date back in March, it was exactly time to coincide with COP26, which is how we got Mark Carney on board and, of course, a great panoply of speakers. So in a year's time, I think we're going to see, well, it's a very good question what we will see, because, of course, the government wants to come out with a series of land announcements about what we're going to do, how we're going to persuade the world to come together in another way like they did in COP21. Exactly what that will look like, I'm not sure, but I'm absolutely certain there'll be a sense of urgency, there'll be a sense of acceleration, and there'll be real concrete plans about how to reach net zero by a series of countries, not least the United Kingdom.
Is it going to take a sense of panic to achieve that?
A little panic? I don't think so, because exactly as we haven't had panic with fax machines being replaced by emails, we will see a determination by commercial interest to drive this. And we as individuals will want to do it because we have been shocked by COVID. We have this sense of well-being that we've lost, but we want to regain. I think we will really be, our headspace is right for change, particularly in energy and in what we eat and what we wear. So I think it's going to be a willing, almost a voluntary change that we make when we're given those opportunities, when we know, for instance, by labeling what we wear, where it comes from, or what we eat, exactly what its carbon content or the carbon content of its production has been. And I know of apps that are being developed right now to do that, to help us along that journey. So I think you'll have a willing public, you've got a very willing government, and we're going to have lots of products coming our way. Just before I finish, can I say that the opportunities for Swedish companies in particular are huge, because Sweden has been on much of this journey. So if you look at home heating, companies like Vattenfall, Nordic Heat, they're going to have a great opportunity in this country with helping us to make the transformation.
Roger, thanks for your contribution to help us move forward on outer thinking. Thanks very much. Nice to see you again. Bye.
Nice to see you, Nick. Very nice to see you. Thanks.
Sir Roger Gifford there, the chair of SEB and also the Green Finance Institute. A couple of phrases to take away. He said towards the end, the headspace now is right for change. He added a bit earlier, the environmentalists have won. Well, let's pick up those themes as we push forward on the green game changer. To Stockholm now, and Gabriel Melkvist, who's anchor and reporter at Dagens Industri, Scandinavia's leading financial newspaper, where he's covered business broadly over the last decade, including as a correspondent in New York and London. Keep the questions coming. Gabriel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Very interesting to move from the financial discussions on to a more broad discussion, including many companies. I hope also many of you viewers will be joining us, asking questions and joining in with your points of view. So please use the question and comment function to join in the discussion. But with no further ado, we'll start with Anna Brodowski. You work with Essity, the Swedish hygienic product giant that was one of the early winners from the pandemic when everybody was hoarding toilet paper. But besides from that, Essity is very deeply involved in climate issues and environmental issues as well. So I wanted to hear your point of view from the corporate point of view. Do you think this pandemic will overshadow or underline the climate issues or the sustainability issues going forward?
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle. Indeed, I represent Essity, which is a global hygiene and health company headquartered in Stockholm, but we exist in 150 different countries and, of course, in the UK, very much so. But no, you're right. I think like everyone, I would say that benefiting from the pandemic is maybe not the right thing to say here, because I think we all are suffering. And of course, for us, important has been to make sure that all our employees are safe and of course that we can contribute to society given the type of products we actually produce, but also to secure our business, because given that some of the parts of society has closed, we have also, had difficulties in some parts of our business. But exactly as you say, hygiene and health are, I think, now on the agenda, and that's where we can help and contribute. So in that sense, and given that we see sustainability in a very broad definition, not just on the environmental side, but actually also like in the UN Sustainable Development Goals does, also on the hygiene field and health. But even if we've seen a lot of intensity here and we have shifted our work immensely to keep production going and also actually started to produce face masks and other types of products, we don't see that we ourselves or actually our peers or the discussion is changing very much on the environmental side either. In fact, I mean, we have put up very ambitious targets. We have plans that we are working on, and those are long-term targets. These are long-term plans that we have already invested in and I will continue to invest in, and that has not changed. Our ambition is still there because we see there is a need. So this is not just for the sake of what discussion is up on the agenda. We see sustainability actually as a business driver for us as well. So, for example, if you take climate, a few years back, we got our science-based target approved, and they are there to be working on and delivered by 2030. Some are setting up longer-term targets, but we see that this decade we're entering into now is the decade of action. It's tremendously important that we do the right efforts now in this decade here. So we have ambitious targets here to work towards lowering greenhouse gas emissions on our manufacturing, but also working throughout the supply chain with the waste and the raw materials that we use. And we heard in the previous session, there was also talk about the resources we use. And of course, as we are a company developing now in the hand hygiene era we're in, obviously hand towels are extremely used and they are made from fiber, wood-based fiber, and here sustainable forest management is critical, but we are also looking into alternatives here. For example, we are investing into a pilot looking at how can you use the end product in farming, so wheat straw, to actually produce paper from this, to kind of balance a bit the use of fresh fiber, which is still important, but it needs to be sustainably sourced, and also recycled paper, but also with this alternative fiber then, just to mention that. And also trying to use and work with our customers, and that's come back to your question about, do we see a change here? No, we also see with our customers and our discussions we're having that the challenges that they saw before the pandemic are still there. To bring an example, we work on Torque Paper Circle, which is the hand towels again, I mentioned them, where using them will actually lead to a lot of waste from our customers. We see that as a very valuable resource for us, the used hand towels, because we tried then with this new system that we are putting in place, Torque Paper Circle, to bring back those used towels to our factories to reproduce then paper. So that brings us sustainable solutions, but it also brings in business solutions to us. And that is not changing. We're on that path.
No loss of focus. That sounds very encouraging. I want to switch to Madeleine Thompson. The Wellcome Trust is both, of course, a very big investor, but coming from a research and a scientific perspective, is there a risk that the last couple of months' very broad focus on medical research can sort of distract us from other fields? And do you see the research community being distracted or distorted in any way during this pandemic?
Well, clearly, yes, there is a concern that climate has, if you like, taken a bit of a backfield during the COVID experience, and Wellcome itself is, which, as you say, is not only an investor, but fundamentally it's a funder. It funds about £1 billion worth of medical and health research every year. And a lot of its investments this year and a lot of its focus has been on COVID response, on supporting drug discovery in particular, and on advocacy to ensure that whatever new therapeutics and vaccines that are developed are available to everybody who needs them. So an enormous amount of effort has gone into COVID response. But I have to say, what's exciting for us is that it hasn't stopped the Trust moving forward on its new strategy. And it launched a new strategy in October, saying that fundamentally it's going to support the science of the big global health challenges for everyone. And the 3 challenges that have been chosen by the Trust, which is not just a 5-year cycle, it's really looking out into the coming decades, are infectious disease, which is, of course, the Trust's big strength and where it has a lot of expertise, mental health, and climate change. And the decision to choose these 3 challenges was made before the pandemic, but it seemed like a very good choice in terms of the big global challenges today. So absolutely, there has been a delay and particularly a funding issue for many colleagues around the world. We can see, particularly from the US, a big decline in funding on global climate and health research that has happened over the last 4 years. But Wellcome is now really significantly moving into this space. And the program that I currently lead has been building, if you like, the evidence for the value of climate and environmental response, not only for the planet, but also for human health. And I think that will now ramp up very rapidly in the coming year or 2.
Very good, very good. Moving next to Vivica Hirdman-Rydberg, representing Investor, which is obviously an investor, but it's representing the Wallenberg family in Sweden, which is quite similar to the Wellcome Trusts in the sense that you do invest and own a lot of companies, but you also sponsor a lot of research and a lot of interesting movements in this particular field. But I want to ask you, Vivica, more about the financial markets. Do you see financial markets as an important driver in this development, in this sustainability shift?
Absolutely so. And hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today. What I just want to say is that I think the pandemic has underlined the importance of businesses, small and large businesses, what happens in a world when businesses have to shut down, and also how interlinked business is. Then moving over to the financial sector, I think the financial sector is very much a catalyst for being a force in driving the necessary transition the world has to move towards in terms of moving to a carbon-free world. So the financial sector is crucial, and I think a lot has happened over the past 2 to 3, maybe 5 years, but particularly so in the last 2 years.
Is this due to funding, bond markets turning green, those kind of issues, or what's the most important components of that, of the finance markets' effect on sustainability?
I think the financial market is sometimes deemed to be very short-termist. I think the financial market can also be seen as being very much a long-term actor. And being long-term, as we at Investor are, we want to secure that the companies that we are engaged in remain long-term competitive, remain best in the different industries they are operating in, And so for us, it's about future-proofing, that we have companies that do not remain with old technology, that they take resources into investing into new technologies, using the innovating power. So it's really about, I would like to underline that financial markets can also be very long term, and we as owners are owners. So to us, it's crucial that we are part of this transition.
Very long term. Kate Andrews, you're an economic correspondent with The Spectator. Thank you for joining us. Following the debate in Britain, are the Brits able to keep focus on sustainability issues given the particular circumstances? You not only have the pandemic, you have a bit of a satanic sandwich with the Brexit at the same time. Do you feel that sustainability is taking a back seat in the public debate at the moment, or is it equally strong going on right now?
Thanks for having me. I think, like in most developed nations, the climate discussion has taken a bit of a backseat, although it's no secret that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is loath to give up his environmental agenda. There's a real push at the moment to incorporate the green agenda and the COVID recovery and what we call here in the UK the levelling up agenda, which is to invest in and revitalize areas really outside of the southeast that on many occasions feel like they've been left behind. And you've seen them try to weave these ideas together. Chancellor Rishi Sunak dedicated billions of pounds to a green homes grant to try to stimulate economic activity by getting people to upgrade their homes. There's been many millions of pounds put into more wind energy. Offshore wind is thought to be a very big success story here in the UK. But there is skepticism around this idea that you can do all of this at once. And no doubt COVID has been a big setback. But to your point about Brexit, I think this is an important one because the government is serious about proving that Brexit doesn't equate to a lowering of standards. And I think they're going to use environmental standards as their main focus here to prove that. It was reported even on Monday that the government is pushing ahead to rejig the way that farmers in the UK are subsidized under the Common Agricultural Policy in the EU. They get subsidies based on how much land they own, but the UK over a 7-year period is going to change that as to how environmentally friendly their land is and how efficient they are at working it. And that is a big change, and they're going to be winners and losers in that process, but it is one that is more focused on the climate and perhaps a bit more honest about what the UK values specifically when it comes to its farming. I think in Downing Street leading up to the US election, it's fair to say that there were very mixed opinions within Downing Street about who they wanted to see become the next US president. But I think there's real quiet delight that Boris Johnson is going to be working with President-elect Joe Biden on the green agenda in particular, because on that agenda, the two men line up quite a bit. They're both focused on international cooperation, and they're both very keen to signal how excited they are about the green agenda. And this is going to be an opportunity for the UK. All being well, the pandemic tackled at the end of 2021, the hope is that the UK is going to be able to host COP26 in Glasgow, and that would likely mean the US president coming to the UK, and Boris Johnson will have the opportunity to show off that soft power, to suggest on the Brexit front that it wants to be a global Britain, it doesn't want to retreat. And I think you should be looking to the environmental agendas to where they're really going to be pushing that global Britain attitude.
Thank you, Kate. That's a very hopeful observation that the green agenda could form a bond across the Atlantic with Mr. Biden and Boris Johnson. I'm also happy to tell you that we have our first question from the audience, and I will run it through all of you very quickly. The question is, how do you define sustainability in the context that you are using it? And I want you to be very quick about this. I'll start with Anna Brodowski from SCT and the corporate environment. How do you define sustainability in your context?
Yeah, I think as I started, we see sustainability as a very, very broad thing, so to say. It's both the environmental agenda, clearly, but it's also social issues. There's economic issues. There are corporate social responsibility issues. So I think we actually looked very early on to the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and out of those 17 ones, they tell us quite a lot what sustainability is and can be, and where the needs are in the world. We have actually selected 6 of them that are very close to what we do. And they have helped us define how we can work on sustainability. So, but it's also broader than that. I think it's also very much around ethics. It's about also business ethics. It's about how you human rights, which is actually part of the Sustainable Development Goals. But we have a very broad perspective of it. So it's not just the environmental, it's the social, and it's the hygiene and health is in it for us as well.
Very good. I'll take the question on to Madeleine. But it's an interesting point that Anna makes, that as we mature, sustainability becomes more than just the green issues. Do you have any thoughts on that, Madeleine?
Well, I think it's very much about the world that we want our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren to inherit. And the sustainability is that the world that they inherit should be better as a result of what we do, and not worse. And that's the sort of fundamental thing at the core. And it was a title of one of the Lancet Countdown reports last year, is effectively the life of a child born today. We have choices to make, choices that their lives will be better, or that if we continue on the pathways that we have, the trajectories that we see, it's a grim situation by the time that child is 30, the time that child is 50, etc. So I think very much is about future generations inheriting a world that they can build and live in a good way.
Madeleine, a follow-up on that. Do you see a silver lining in this pandemic, that perhaps the gravity of the situation has made us more philosophical or more forward-looking, in a sense that we can appreciate what you just discussed, the focus on future generations?
If you go back to the Paris Agreement in 2015, health is mentioned as a sort of primary issue, but only almost on the front page. After that, it's not really mentioned at all. So health has been very much outside of the climate discourse, and it's been very hard as a health person to figure out why, on the one hand, the health community is not engaged on climate, and on the other hand, the climate community has not been engaged on health. This, I think, has changed radically this year because of the consciousness that COVID has brought to us of the interconnectedness of environment and human health, and many of the observations that we have seen as a result of the crisis, lockdowns of economies, clearing skies and air pollution, etc. All of these things have come to the fore, not just for specialists, but very much for the public and policymakers as well. So, and at the same time, we have a community of health professionals who are absolutely at the forefront of arguing the case for climate action. And note in particular the UK's NHS, which in October launched its net zero strategy, the first health system in the world to do that. And you see that health professionals themselves now heavily invested in action on climate. So it's very much a process of convergence. And we are at a time of extraordinary convergence in ideas, and which is creating big opportunities, but we must seize those opportunities now.
Viveka, I'll let you answer. Follow up on Madeleine, or go back to the initial question, about how you define sustainability.
In a very, very broad sense, of course. It's about, the world we want to live in going forward and for the next upcoming generations. I think the way we relate to it, it's about governance and business ethics. Of course, climate and resource efficiency, but also inclusion. And inclusion in the broad sense, with different mindsets, different perspectives, but also about social inclusion. And I think a key forward is also partnerships and collaboration. It's collaboration and partnerships between the business community and the policymakers, and it's also partnerships within industries and between industries in order to come up with broad solutions that we need in order to fight the very, very complex challenges we are facing.
Kate, should we add education to this list of definitions of what sustainability really is? So, what would you like to add in when we do this defining work?
Well, I certainly agree with the previous speakers that sustainability goes far past the green agenda. However, when I'm speaking about it, especially in the political context, I think the main focus is the green agenda. And here in the UK, I think that's for one very important reason. And that's because we simply have not yet seen, it has not been published, the pathway that the UK plans to take to get to now its legal requirement to meet net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And over the course of the pandemic, for obvious reasons, we've had a lot of talk about investment and changes to health and even education in the UK. But as we were saying previously, the climate, well, certainly not off the list, has not been the main focus of discussion. And there are a lot of questions as to how this target is going to be met. Certain technological advancements that we may not have developed yet that could be crucial for really creating a sustainable world. And by that, I mean one where the trade-offs that people are asked to make are not too great, one where we continue to thrive and our quality of life continues to increase while also meeting our green sustainability goals. So completely agree that we need to incorporate more into that term. But I think from the political perspective, the pressure needs to stay on those main questions because those are the ones here in the UK anyway that really haven't been answered yet.
Very good. I'll let Anna follow up on the previous, on both Kate and Viveka's reflections earlier.
Yeah, no, I mean, what Viveka was saying, I fully subscribe to that because, of course, collaboration is key here. And I think we say it a lot, but it can be said again that, I mean, for us to reach the targets or even to set the targets that we have set and set our ambition and our plans, we need to talk to others to understand how it can be done, what's also needed in society. And those dialogues are critical to kind of see that you're on the right way and understand how you can contribute as a business, but also where you need to collaborate. And I think it's both, as you said, Viveka, between companies, I think throughout the whole value chain. Actually, if I take an example as waste, for example, I mean, working for us together with the policymakers here is key, but also to work, obviously, we can design, we can innovate products that are maybe easier to recycle or that they actually contain less material of that's more renewable material or whatever it might be, but in the end we need to have a very strong dialogue then with those who help us put the material into the chain, and then of course how do we handle the waste? We can do parts, but we need to also then look at the waste systems. How are they developed and how can we discuss that? So very important to have those collaboration and partnerships, and I think also to have transparent and it comes often back for us, but I think some sort of transparency long-term and predictability is critical for us to be able to understand when we talk plastic, how do we define that, what's in, what's out, and how do we make sure we can innovate around it and find a better way to drive innovation forward. It's important also that we have transparent and long-term and also a bit of predictability, and we want to be part of that discussion, of course.
We all want to, I hope. Part of the discussion is also Sophie Zetterlund from Schroeder. She is asking Viveka one question. Do you at Investor focus on investing in best-in-class ESG companies, or do you look also at companies that are on a journey to improve ESG? Should the investor put their money in the already very good companies like Essity and others, or should you also be participating in a journey towards improvement?
I'll just say one thing, and that investor, we are not an institutional investor. The companies we are engaged in, we have for the long term, we have more or less an internal ownership perspective. And and we work as an owner to really strive for them to be best in class in all aspects. So that means that if there are companies that we think can do more, then we push them, and we do that through the boards. And of course, there are companies that are now on a transition path, and then we try to push them.
Very good, very good. And I hope they respond to being pushed. Madeline, you're also an institutional owner. Would you say that the companies, the business communities, has taken a driver's seat in Britain and in general, or are the policymakers the drivers of sustainability issues, or do they co-drive together?
I think that's kind of outside of my competence, in the sense that the trust we have, the investor side and the spend side, if you like, are two very separate parts of the organisation. So I can think more on the research investments. Where do we want to invest on that side? And what's key to the sort of research agenda, I think, is this idea of investing in transdisciplinarity. That is, we don't just invest in the researcher community to come up with great ideas and great models or great new products, etc., but we also invest in that process of research translation. So transdisciplinary research already involves policymakers from the get-go. It already involves practitioners from the get-go, and it can also then bring early on the most affected populations to try and understand what are the big priorities. So from a research side, I think bringing in policymakers and researchers together is going to be forward.
Very good. Vivica wants to follow up on that one.
I just want to, I think in many ways, at least the Nordic business community is in a sense ahead of the policymakers. The Nordic business community is collaborating, is working with the whole value chain, revisiting business models. Of course, the policymakers are in a sense setting the framework, but sometimes it gets a bit in a silo mentality, and companies being global take a broader perspective.
It sounds very encouraging. We could perhaps learn from the research community and not to think in silos and kind of integrate this movement forward. Kate, what are your thoughts on the last question? Who's in the driver's seat? You mentioned the policy side, which seems very strong in Britain. There's a strong political commitment to sustainability issues. Are the companies meaningfully contributing as well, or should more be done on that side?
So I think, broadly speaking, big companies in the UK are on board with the green agenda, but let's not forget many of them stand to benefit from certain subsidies that could come their way. And I think that the onus and responsibility on the private sector to contribute substantially to this is quite big. It can't simply fall on the state or better said, the taxpayer to pick up this bill, which we know is going to be expensive, and we should be honest about that. The shift to net zero is not going to be cheap. With the UK in particular in such a difficult financial position, yes, interest rates are extremely low. That's probably why the Prime Minister and his Chancellor are still quite happy to pledge money to the green agenda. But with a deficit of nearly £400 billion this year, a deficit by 2025 that's still expected to be £100 billion, the government's going to have to make trade-offs. And I suspect, it's my deep suspicion, given where I think Boris Johnson's personal interests lie, as well as what was in his manifesto, that they probably won't compromise on the green agenda. That is something that they will continue to commit to, but it does mean that compromise might have to be made elsewhere. And that's why it's going to be crucial to have an open dialogue, and a successful one, between the public and private sectors, because there's no way that we're getting to net zero without the cooperation and, frankly, funding from the private sector here in the UK.
Very good. Anna, I'll let you close the discussion. As a representative for one of the companies, do you feel like you are actually sitting in the driver's seat here, or do you feel that the policymakers are?
No, I think as Vivica and I think Madeleine also said is I mean, obviously we are thinking global. We have to do that. It's sort of how when we develop our solutions and we operate, we have to think global. Also when we do our manufacturing and production and thinking logistics around that and so on. So of course we kind of make sure that we can try to facilitate some kind of a global common denominators in some areas. And maybe there to some extent, I don't say that we are in the driver's seat at all, but we try to argue for that because I think there are some obvious synergies and winnings actually that we can also, but then of course there are local differences, and I think that needs to be driven in the local settings. But I think, as I said before, collaboration will be key. We all have different things that we bring to the table. We can contribute with solutions, but we have limits in what we can do. But there others come in, and policymakers clearly are the ones who can facilitate, encourage, incentivize, and hopefully more on incentivizing and encouraging than the stick part, because we think there is a lot of interest in moving forward here. I think we hear that in this panel today. So hope we can continue to collaborate all around that table, so to speak.
I hope so too. I think we should all be in the driver's seats here. Thank you for being in the driver's seat in this panel. Anna Brodowski with Essity, Vivica Hirdman-Ryberg with Investor, Madeleine Thompson with the Wellcome Trust, and Kate Andrews with the Spectator. Thank you all very much, and over to you, Nick.
My next guest and speaker is Lisa Lindström, one of Sweden's strongest voices for the power of innovative business and leadership, just what green is going to require. She co-founded and led the design from Dobermann, which was later acquired by EY, acknowledged as Sweden's best firm in the industry, Sweden's best workplace, and one of Sweden's most innovative companies. She has important perspectives on employee empowerment and the future of leadership. Lisa joins us from Sweden. Keep the questions coming. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. So, hi everyone. Really great to be here. And I want to share a couple of thoughts on what could be an inspiration on the new leadership. So I come from Dobermann, and we are a team who wants to blend business design and engineering to really help our clients to find that new version of them. And as such, I've been practicing, I think, my whole life in how we explore leading in times of change. So I wanted to bring today 5 principles of what I think could be some clues. I don't know it all, but maybe a couple of clues of what the future of leadership could hold. And of course, I need to start what leadership is all about. We are here to lead people, and of course, we need to put our peoples first. And to do so, I think that if we want to make sure that we truly understand all that untapped capacity that we have in our organizations, all those opportunities that sits within, every single person, in every single organization, also in society, we need to create safe arenas, places where I can be me, where I can be a human, and where I can really explore curiosity, exploration, because to be honest, to leading in the new, we need to embrace the fact that none of us know. We need to talk about the real things that we need to talk about. We need to understand that in a time of change where we can find brilliant new technology that could really foster a new way, are we then really putting people first and talking about what we need to talk about? And I found an example at a big tech company in California that I found really beautiful. On one of their walls, they put just a big post saying, why are we not talking about? And then people were encouraged to put post-it notes and encourage people to talk about the things that the company need to talk about. So can you as a leader invite your people to be as open, as transparent? Do you have that safe zone where I dare to say, these are the things that are important to me so that I can do a better version of me at work and in life? And as a leader today, I think it's important to recognize that the need for speed in change is so big, and we cannot do it alone. We need to make sure that we are inclusive and that we really master partnerships, that we welcome friction. If we are diverse, if we think that different perspectives are really, really beneficial, then we also need, as leaders, to say, great that we have friction. Great that the way that we master our partnerships is to allowing different people to be different, to act different, to say different things. And one of the things that we tried out a year ago was, what if we as designers, as business people, as engineers, would have a musical composer in our team? What would that lead to? When did you hire a philosopher, an artist, a comedian, a musician to your team? Maybe that is also about being inclusive for real and master partnerships. And one thing that I'm still practicing, and that is one of my own guiding stars, is that if we want to have change, we need to allow for new ideas to flourish. But the new great ideas does not come the first time I try out my thought or my idea. Actually, it will come when I dare to say the more crazy, the more radical, the more disruptive things. So as leaders, I think that we need to say yes much more often than no. Because that first no that you say when someone is coming to you with a not so radical idea is going to kill creativity, is going to kill trust, is going to kill that person's interest in giving you more. So we need to foster a culture of innovation where we dare to say yes much more often than no. This is not easy, promise. I've tried it for 20 years and I still have to practice, because I need to embrace that no longer can we think out in a linear way what the world will look like. So therefore, what was, right 5 years ago when I tried it the last time is maybe not right today. So therefore, I shouldn't say no to something I already tried or build on my experience. I should actually say yes, maybe 5 times before my first no. And today, this has always been valid, I think, but more so in a society where we have so many different challenges, where technology could lead us to brilliant innovations, but could also be radically threatening, where we have a society that is polarized, where we have, a planet that really needs us to act. I think we need, as leaders, to anchor our ethical compass and make sure that we use the power that we have to lead to guide us into things where we as people are the one who could, really connect our brain with our heart, with our soul, to make sure that we do right. And therefore, I think that we need to make sure we are not stressed. We need to make sure that we are not pressured. The way to listen to that human aspect of those skills that we bring in with non-linear thinking, creativity, critical thinking, empathy, I need to make sure that I'm me, that I'm present. I need to make sure that, I do to myself what I need to do so that I can bring my ethical compass to work. And I've been driving, my own company with a very simple figure, but that has been a guiding star that is easy for me. So in every single decision I make, I try to make sure that we have a good balance between quality, profitability, and people. And it all for me starts with remembering that if people have the right conditions, they will, create great quality, and that in itself will give us profitability. So easy to say, actually pretty hard to do. And lastly, I think that we should introduce a new KPI. I think that only going for profitability is going to be a bit dangerous, because that is us optimizing an existing business. But if we do believe that we as companies, as organizations, need to really adopt to the world that is constantly changing, why don't we start measure learning? Maybe one of the key KPIs that could tell us if we are on track is learning. And therefore, I actually think that as leaders, no longer can we just tell the world or tell an organization or tell a team what they should do. I think our job is to act as teachers. And for me, teachers are the ones who are making sure that I understood. So I can broadcast a message, not so hard, but the tricky piece is to see, and did you get it? How can I get evidence? How can I make sure that I use language and symbols and tell stories in a way so that people are freed up to understand the purpose of why we are here and where we're heading, and free me up to explore, experiment, and try out new ways of working so that we can kind of do the change that we want to do with speed. So the 5 principles that I wanted to kind of send you off with is: put your people first, be truly inclusive and master new partnerships, say yes more often than no, make sure that you are present and anchor your ethical compass, and perhaps introduce a new KPI, learning. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you very much. Listening to that, I'm inspired, but I'm also thinking to myself, how many leaders actually say, yes, you're absolutely right, Lisa. That's the kind of thing I really am doing at the moment, or I want to do. But actually, there's a bit of washing going on there, because they do it because they like to think in their brain that they're doing it, but in reality, they haven't yet embraced the principles that you've now put on the record there.
Yeah, I would say that, there's one thing to say all these things, but then that doesn't mean anything if you don't execute on it. And therefore, when I say, say yes more often than no, I also know every person that I work with hears that. And then I need to act like that, and I need to execute on that. And I think that the more important piece here is to understand that this is about my identity. So as a leader, if I want to lead in the way that I was talking about, I need to let go of power. I need to let go of everything that I've trained to do, which is in a linear society optimizing, and open up and say, maybe my team collectively is smarter than me.
But how many do you reckon really are prepared to do that? In other words, I'm getting back to my point that actually they say, yes, that's so important. I really want to do that. I've got the mind space to be able to do it. But actually they're still hovering on the threshold. They still can't quite cross that threshold.
But isn't it a little bit like training? Okay, all of us would say, yes, I'm going to train more, but I need to have a personal trainer to maybe go with me to start lead in a new way. So how many are doing it? Maybe not so many. How many want to do it? The intent might actually be there. And then I think we need to have personal trainers for our leaders to make them more confident that because this is going out in a really risky world. So leaving your traditional leadership and lead in a new way is basically saying, you need to give up something. And then you might want to have a personal trainer or something like that, a coach in your way to be with you.
All right, well, Lisa, thank you very much. I'm tempted to say anyone out there who has done exactly what Lisa is encouraging, please tell us. Then I can at least highlight that it is doable and people really want to do it. Lisa, thank you very much indeed for those 5 cardinal expressions of what the principles are or should be for leadership. Much appreciated. Thank you for joining us. Now, we're doing a lot of handbrake turns here, but they all come together in so many ways on leadership, transforming in the way we want to establish the way forward on outer thinking. What about the future workforce, the future of work? What kind of skills? We've already been talking about the need to reskill, not least because of the fundamental changes which are going on. That's our next panel. And I'm going to be joined by Daniel Franklin, who's going to be taking it away now with his panel. He's been with The Economist since the 1980s. He's currently an executive and diplomatic editor. He's further published 2 books focusing on long-term trends and what the world will look like in 2050. And Daniel and I, we're not often at this time of year when you're about to publish what the world's going to be like next year, Daniel. I say, really? Do you know what's going to happen? You say you know what's going to happen in 2050, and I'm prepared to say to you, do you mean 2050 the year or 2050 in 4 hours' time? I leave it to you to take over your panel on the future of the workforce.
Thank you very much, Nick. Well, actually, 2050 is much easier than 2021 because the long-term trends sometimes appear a little bit more clearly than the short-term ones. And I think one of the things that COVID has done is accelerate a lot of trends. So we're going to be looking at what that all means for the future of work and for the next generation in the workforce. And in particular, what is technology doing to the workforce of the future? What does it mean for employees? What does it mean for the skills that the workforce is going to need? What does it mean for the motivation of people in the workforce? All sorts of questions around this, very relevant to all of us, I think. And to enlighten us on this, we're joined by Francis O'Grady, General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, Josh Hardy, Deputy Director General of the CBI, and Susanna Campbell, Non-Executive Director at Kinnevik. Welcome to all of you. Francis, if I can come to you first, I think one of the truisms or the most frequently said cliches of the workforce of the future is that it needs to be flexible because the world is changing so fast. And I'm sure that is true, but there's also concerns about security amid that flexibility. So tell us how you see the balance between those two, getting the flexibility and a degree of security, an adequate degree of security at the same time.
Well, the workforce of tomorrow, of course, is with us today. And I have to say that I think a lot of young people are having a pretty rough time in the British jobs market. What's clear is that all our work shows that they're optimistic, they're ambitious, they're talented, but they're also feeling really anxious, insecure and broke. So that's where we're starting from. I think another kind of key part of young people's experience today is that they are more likely to be subject to oppressive forms of surveillance at work. We've just done a report at the TUC showing that 2/3 of workers don't even know when new technologies are introduced, particularly AI, but they suspect that they're being monitored, and that makes them feel worried, very often, particularly in these COVID times, quite lonely and alienated in the work that they're doing. So I guess the big challenge for us is we all know that tech can be a great liberator. It could sweep away some of the more boring, routine, monotonous tasks. It could enrich jobs and work experience. And of course, it could massively boost productivity. We've seen how AI alone could boost productivity by 10% by 2030. So the big question is, how do we ensure that the benefits are genuinely shared and that we create, for sure, greener jobs, but also better jobs, and more fairly rewarded, more satisfying, with opportunities to learn and progress, and in the parts of the country that need them most. So We're not going to do that unless we reset the balance between flexibility and security. Flexibility needs to be a two-way street. Too often in places like Amazon, on a 0 hours contract or an agency contract, it can feel pretty one way. There's a real appetite amongst working people to have more freedom and positive flexibility at work in a way that supports family life. So that's one big area. But I think there are big questions too about labour standards, around our welfare net, around how we support people make the transition between jobs, not just in terms of skills training and upskilling, but in terms of their security of income too.
Can I ask you, pick you up on that very interesting phrase, positive flexibility? Because if you take, for example, the gig economy, which is for some is positive, it gives flexibility, it gives the ability to work around sometimes timing that suits people, fit in more than one job sometimes. But it also has connotations of low protection and lack of choice sometimes if you have no other benefits. So how do you, as in the trade union movement, tackle this and welcome the flexibility perhaps in the positive way, but compensate for the negative aspects of it?
Yeah, we root what we do in what people tell us they want. And there's a lot of kind of mythology about flexibility, that isn't actually always telling the story of what workers want. People do want more freedom, they do want flexibility, but they also want guarantees on their hours, because otherwise they would have no guarantee on their wage packet. Increasingly, we have, delivery drivers, a massively growing army as part of the labour force today. They want predictability of hours. It's really hard to be able to organise childcare or commit to go and see your kids play at school if you don't know what shifts you're working, and if you turn up at work and you're told go home without any compensation. So there are lots of practical changes that we're seeking through agreement with employers, but we also believe that we need a basic floor of statutory rights, labour standards, that ensure that the decent employer isn't undercut by the bad too.
Okay, so government has a role in setting those standards. If I can come to you, Josh, there's also the question of skills, obviously, the skills for the workforce of the future. And one of the things that's really struck me is we've heard so many warnings in recent times that all our jobs are going to disappear through technology. And yet, at the same time, employers have great trouble finding the people with the skills that they need to fill the openings that they do have. So education, the right sort of training, that's obviously crucial in this. What should be done now to make sure we have those skills for the future?
Well, look, I think it's such an urgent time now. We can talk about skills, we can talk about job security, both those are critical, but we also have to realise that the primary threat to a lot of young people and other groups is unemployment at the moment because of the pandemic. So I think there's a real priority, first of all, to make sure we're minimising that. That means in this sort of weird no man's land that we're now in the UK between the end of national lockdown and the rollout of a vaccine, just making sure that keep firms going with that financial support, use testing to make sure there are no more draconian lockdowns, keep things as stable as we can while we hope that light is there at the end of the tunnel. And also, of course, get a Brexit deal and then ease that transition in January, because if you do that, businesses can start to invest. If they start to invest and grow, you can start to get people back into work. So that's absolutely critical. That sort of prevention is the best thing. But absolutely right. That's not enough on its own, because this isn't just a numbers game. Those jobs need to be good jobs. And Francis is right. There's been a huge structural change in our economy through digitization, through new forms of, the gig economy, those sorts of things. The world of work needs to catch up with that. The world of tax needs to catch up with that. This structural change has happened quickly and we're behind it. And at the center of all of that is skills. There will be more jobs likely created by technology than are lost. There'll just be different jobs. Our calculations show 9 out of 10 of us are going to need reskilling by the end of the decade. So none of us are free of this, right? If you're sitting there thinking it's not me, well, there's a 90% chance you're kidding yourself. But there's a risk this does fall more harshly at some of those lower skilled, more easily automated ends of the economy. It's going to cost £130 billion over the next decade to solve the skills crisis. Business have a huge role to play there. Already invest, quite hard to pin down, but about £45 billion a year. That, for context, is more than the English secondary school budget, business invest in skills. But it's not enough, and it's not always, if we're honest, directed in the right way to the right people. But you also need government investment and probably some personal investment as well, because it depends whether you're upskilling within your job, whether you're retraining to transition into a new job or sector, or whether it's something that you want to do for your own development. So there's a huge challenge there. If we can unshackle ourselves from the sort of the dead weight of COVID and Brexit, then I think we've got a chance next year to look at all of this stuff. I mean, in some ways, it feels like businesses are a bit of a coiled spring at the moment. We've had 4 years of uncertainty. Let's get rid of that, and then let's spring forward. And so many of these big questions will take government, unions, and businesses working together collaboratively to find that sort of sweet spot where we all agree.
So I fear that it's a bit of a forlorn hope that suddenly certainty is going to appear on the horizon. It may be that we're just going to have to live with this uncertainty. But can I come back to you very rightly at the beginning mentioned the immediate problem. Our focus is on the future. And there's a kind of link between those two, because there's a question of policy, really, as to whether the right approach now is to support the existing jobs through furlough schemes and so on, or to support individual people and help them train for the jobs of the future. So is government getting it wrong in some senses to support the existing structure of the economy too much at the expense of precisely preparing for these very different industrial structures, economic structures of the future?
It's very difficult, isn't it? And it may be one of those areas where there's a slight tension between the sort of the on-paper economics and the human aspect that is real life. We're talking about real people with real jobs who are facing real hardship and potentially destitution. So I think everything we can do to help them is right. There was a while ago, a lot of talk, wasn't there, about viable jobs. And there's some logic to saying, right, if your job actually does not exist anymore, then the state paying that for a year or more maybe isn't the best idea. Maybe the best idea is for you to go into the labour market, get retrained. But that relies on actually getting those schemes, those initiatives in place that mean people do get retrained and do have a bright future. So whether it's Kickstart, whether it's accelerating apprenticeship levy, whether it's getting local labour markets actually with unions, FE colleges, job centres, businesses really working together so that those people, where they do lose their jobs, actually have hope and have a chance and get back on the route. So I wouldn't want to make it too blunt and sort of mathematical a model. I think the government broadly actually has done some really good stuff. The key right now is going to be to keep that spirit of agility, because if you're in a tier 3 region, or if you're in hospitality, leisure, tourism, or if you're in a supply chain, things right now are as tough as they've ever been and your resilience is gone. So we mustn't stop with that financial support. We mustn't sort of seize defeat from the jaws of victory almost. We've got to keep watching, keep helping, because the more people and firms that are active when we come out the other side, whatever the level of certainty, the faster we'll actually be able to make progress in the new year.
Good. Well, can I, by the way, encourage everybody who wants to ask questions in the chat function. We'd love to have some questions for the panelists, so do feel free to start asking them now. Meanwhile, I'm going to turn to you, Susanna, and your focus is really on the investment side of things. So you're very aware of the availability of the right labour skills when you make these investments, and also you're coming from a country where some of the collaboration that we have been hearing about that is necessary sometimes is perhaps better done than it is in the UK. So do tell us about lessons from Sweden, but also your lessons from the investment side of things in how you look at the workforce component of that.
Yes, thank you. Well, obviously we're in challenging times now, but if you take a more long-term view, obviously what we're seeing is really some long-term trends, things that were already happening and now being accelerated by this by COVID. So the whole digitization in general and tech being kind of both replacing jobs and creating new ones, that's all happening a lot faster now in this situation where we are. And that's both challenging and obviously contains a bunch of opportunities as well. And as an investor, I also look at many startups. And a few positive things that I've taken away from this is where I was scared that this COVID crisis would potentially kind of reverse some trends on focus on sustainability and so on. I feel that is definitely not the case. Because in this, if you look at globally and the war of talent and how do you find the best people to deliver on what you want to do as a company, the talent pool is increasingly global for what you want to achieve, and purpose-driven companies and having a strong purpose, not only a strong business idea, but also a strong idea of how you want to contribute to society as a company and what your kind of bigger picture role is as a company, that is becoming more and more key to attract core talent, and especially in the younger generations. One specific example is I'm an advisor to an investor in and board member of Northvolt, which is a very ambitious battery startup in Sweden. We aim to manufacture the world's greenest batteries, and we are building Europe's first, or one of the first gigafactories up in northern Sweden in Skellefteå, which is very far up north. Basically we're now employing around 1,000 people, 75 nationalities, a very strong R&D team, mainly from with Asian skills there. That's where we've found the leading kind of battery technology knowledge. We have our first factory up in just outside. It's an R&D facility just west of Stockholm, and then the factory up north will directly employ about 3,000-4,000 people. We expect to have it up and running at the end of 2021. And it's been an extremely interesting journey to see how we find the right competence to do this in a European setting, and that we don't really have this kind of knowledge in Europe. And a couple of key takeaways from that is reskilling, tying back to what Josh was saying as well, extremely important for the workforce in general and for our society, because as some types of jobs are disappearing, others are being created. And in Europe, we haven't been quite as good as other geographies sometimes to be ahead of the curve in terms of reskilling and making sure we have the right competence. But now we need to be fast to actually get on that train and actually create that skill and make sure that we have the right educations and create the jobs of the future.
So it's fascinating to me that you're actually creating a northern powerhouse, literally a battery factory right up north in Sweden. Are you finding that you're hiring or you're looking to hire locally, or are people prepared to move to a completely different, presumably much colder location, more remote location, in order to have a job that, again, presumably has a degree of purpose to it, to pick up your earlier comment, because it's helping to create a greener world?
Yeah. I would say with Northvolt, we have an extremely strong purpose, and that's also how we attract talent globally, that we want to be the greenest alternative. So we're working a lot with recycling of batteries and so on, just to make sure that we are leading in developing, in kind of enabling electrification and also creating a greener world. In Skellefteå, up north in Sweden, not only are we intending to employ 3,000 people, but the municipality believes that this will actually create in total about 10,000 jobs in a very small town. So no, we won't find all this competence locally. We will definitely have to, partly we work with universities in kind of all of northern Sweden to create programs to create the kind of skills locally as well for what we need. But also we will recruit both all over Sweden and globally to find the right skills, and hoping to find people who are prepared to live at this time of year very much in the dark up there. But it's a very nice place.
Francis, can I come to you on that? Do you find this business of both purpose and mobility, being prepared to move to where the jobs are, something that's going to be more and more important in the future? And if so, how do you encourage that? How do you enable it to happen while also protecting the rights of the people who are moving?
Well, I think in terms of the UK government's levelling up agenda, creating good local jobs is becoming a purpose in itself, or it should be, if we're going to achieve the kind of levelling up that the government has been talking about. And you know, I guess one of the other things we've all learned is just how poor many of our transport links are between local towns and cities, what a long tail of low-skilled, unskilled labour we have in the UK compared to Sweden and other countries, and the role that we could play if, as Josh said, there was that sense of putting heads together between government nationally and locally, unions and business, to try and tackle some of the practical problems that we face. But I think there is an appetite in the country that, having been through the pandemic, a sense that we can't just go back to business as usual. There has to be, even out of the EU, there has to be a social dimension to the industrial policy that we hear the government will be launching in the new year. And certainly, you know, we will have very strong views on what that social dimension should look like. But the idea that we just carry on with growing inequality, growing discontent, the pretty ugly politics that can give rise to, I think is something actually that countries across Europe are going to have a bit of humility and recognise that unless we give people a better stake in their society, unless we do something genuine about levelling up, then we are storing up big problems for the future. You can't have mass unemployment and not scar communities. And as we know from the 80s, those scars last a very long time.
So I have the impression that everybody on this panel is sort of in agreement about the kind of aims, the sorts of things that need to happen. And you all seem to think that there's a lot of partnership involved between the various parties, government, employers, employees, and so on. So why isn't it happening? What's in the way, and where is the best model? Josh, why isn't it happening? It seems so eminently desirable.
I mean, firstly, I'd say in many cases it is happening. No, I mean, I'll be blunt and slightly obsequious, but the moments I'm proudest of are the CBI, where my ex-boss Carolyn Fairbairn and Francis stood together several times to show business and unions united on issues from COVID to Brexit. And I think we work more closely with the TUC and others than ever before. We also, of course, work very closely with government. I would say, look, if we're being honest about it, Brexit has driven a bit of a wedge between business and government, because it was something that the public voted for that business on the whole didn't terribly want. And that's in many cases an understatement. And that has led to a bit of tension. But I think in some ways the pandemic has brought that relationship back together because it's been so fundamentally important. But we need to make it more than just these sort of bilateral relationships. We need to have, whether it's unions, businesses, as Francis says, local leaders and national leaders. We've seen some of the communications challenges between metro mayors and government during the pandemic. We need to learn all of those lessons, because where we've got it right, I think of the days when I was with Paul Novak helping the government draft the guidance for how firms stayed open in March or April. Where we got that right, my God, it made a difference. It saved people's jobs, it kept the economy going. Where we've got it wrong, it's had real costs. So the evidence is absolutely inescapable. So I think our call, and the call from most people I talk to, is let's build on that, and let's use the new year as a sort of fresh start for those relationships, because none of us can do it on our own. And it's a slightly boring truism to say we are stronger together, but it's right.
Well, one has the feeling, though, that yes, it happens, but it's not quite in the bloodstream of the way that Britain works, in the way that perhaps it is. Would you say, Susanna, it is more in the bloodstream in Sweden? And what can we learn, perhaps? What can Sweden teach Britain on this front?
Unfortunately, I guess I would say both yes and no. I think there's still a bit of a sometimes politicians suspecting businesses for only profit maximizing, and business thinking that politicians are a bit slow and not understanding kind of what business are doing. But I think we have fundamentally an okay dialogue here in Sweden. But one dimension that I've been a lot more positive to in the last few years is actually the EU agenda. And I guess that's one incremental challenge for Britain in this, and not being part of the EU going forward. Is if you look at something like, again, battery technology being one example, or kind of green investments in general, where the EU have taken a very clear view and have a very strong agenda, and that has definitely assisted a company like Northvolt, for instance. So I think for Britain, I guess it's important to still be part of the European agenda in some way, and make sure that Brexit doesn't mean that you're not in dialogue with the EU and the EU countries, because we are still both geographically and culturally very close. So I think ensuring that cooperation will be extremely important going forward.
So we don't have all that much time left, but Frances, you want to come in? Sorry.
I do. I think we have, in the UK, we've made some kind of cultural progress, if you like, particularly between parts of business and many unions in terms of cooperation. I think there are big structural issues in the UK that are problematic. If you look at the nature of ownership, the shrinking of the public sector, corporate governance that still favours short-termism and shareholder supremacy over any consideration of the environment or the workforce. And then I think there's a battle of ideas too. So we've just had the spending review in the UK, where it's seen that suppressing wages is a way to protect jobs. I would say absolutely we need to shift our ideas about the kind of growth that we want to see, and how rising living standards in real terms for working people should be at the heart of that. That's the way to get our economy growing and sharing better than we have before. So I think we've still got a lot of work to do.
I'm sure that's right. Can I ask, in the little time we've got left, but there will still be time if anybody does want to call in with a question or write in with a question. We've talked a lot about what governments should do. We've talked a lot about what businesses could do. In this final few minutes, I'd like to turn attention to what young people today might do. If you were giving some advice to a young person starting out on their career, what should they be thinking about? How should they be planning their future in a world that is so full of uncertainties, where because of COVID, life is particularly tough, but not only because of COVID, but because the world is moving so quickly, and it is hard to see what the jobs of tomorrow are going to be. So perhaps, Susanna, come to you first on this. What would you be telling a young person coming onto the labour market over the next couple of years?
I would be talking to them about education and understanding the future, and actually understanding which industries are growing and which are not, and how do you position yourself and your own kind of skills base for what is growing. So being a bit more aware maybe of what's coming, and there's so many positive things coming as well. And if you see how money is actually being put into companies that are doing good things, I think that can very much match with the values that I see in the new generation coming out into the workforce. So I see huge opportunity for the people who are curious and want to learn and want to see into the future and want to follow the trends.
So emphasizing the positive. Josh, what about you?
Well, I suppose to build on that, the first thing I'd say is don't panic. There are going to be opportunities. There's going to be growth. There will be jobs. And remember, whatever your prospective employer, what are they looking for? They're looking for great people who are going to get involved and help them drive their organisation forward. So have that mindset. And I think the third thing I'd say is be demanding. Young people can set the agenda. They are in demand. Don't feel you're on the back foot. Have a voice. Push your employer. Make sure that your view of morals, of values, of what you expect out of your job actually is really understood and taken account of, because you're not on the back foot here. You actually control much more of the agenda than you think you might.
Francis, final word to you.
Well, we know that there is a real thirst amongst young people for training, learning, being coached, being supported in making those choices, having somebody by your side who's, you know, a wise counsel, your best mate at work. So I think that is absolutely right. Get as many training and development opportunities as you can. I think look after your mental health. We've seen quite an epidemic amongst young people during this pandemic in particular, but also associated with these very insecure ways of working. And of course, I'm going to say, join a union, because that is your best chance of being respected and treated well and fairly at work, and having a voice for our values. We know we've got quite a very progressive generation of young people in the UK. If you look at voting intentions and any other measure, I think we can be even stronger by joining together and having our voice heard.
Well, thank you all very much. I can't say that we've solved it all, but I do think I must say that we've not either shied away from the daunting challenges that there are ahead. I think that's been pretty clear. Very fast changing world, very, very difficult environment to be in, made significantly more challenging by COVID. But I do sense a sort of fundamental optimism from all of you, and that I take away as being encouraging, both if you're in business, but also if you're starting out on this adventure of a career now. So thank you all very much for all your insights, and I hope that we'll be able to check up on the state of play in the not too distant future, and how this brave new workforce of the future is shaping up. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Francis, Josh, Susanna and Daniel, thanks very much for the outer thinking, keeping pushing forward and positiveness there, which is great to hear. We're going to take a break, or you're going to take a break now. A break, a breather, whatever you want to call it, juice, coffee, tea, or just getting up and walking around. 3 minutes, please. Then we're going to be joined by one of the most influential women in tech, Pippa Malmgren, on how tech is the underlying driver for change. Back in 3 minutes.
Wearing a seatbelt is a terrible idea.
Hey, it's a terrible, terrible idea. They're calling it a violation of human rights.
For me, it saved my life. That wasn't the day to die, basically.
Have you seen my Zen can?
Nope, haven't seen it.
Houston, we have a problem.
We're into the final 45 minutes. Welcome back. And we'll be focusing on tech and the huge impact on society. So do stay with us. We'll also be joined right at the end by Olive Skook, who is the head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, a former very distinguished Swedish diplomat. He'll pull together the issues for takeoff and takeaway, so to get some clarity of what we'll have achieved in our 3.5 hours together. Please use the question function at the bottom, as many of you have been doing. Let me introduce you now to Pippa Malmgren, who was a Special Assistant for Economic Policy on the National Economic Council to President George W. Bush. The co-founder of H Robotics, creating drones and autonomous vehicles for heavy industries, published several books on leadership and world economy. Last year, The Infinite Leader, 2018, The Leadership Lab. There you can see Pippa. Welcome, Pippa, because you're going to be talking about how technology is really going to is already affecting our society, and above all, how we're all going to cope with it. Over to you, Pippa, and please get those questions coming in if you'd like to challenge Pippa at all. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's great to see you. So I want to begin with this. Technology is facilitating extraordinary results, just mind-blowing. And the biggest obstacle to the implementation of technology is actually imagination. But most of us have been trained to use our analytical skills. And we think that if we dive deeper into the data, we study something more deeply, if we're rational and logical, that this is where we'll get the best answer, the best outcome. But what I have found in looking both at leadership and from my own personal experience working in highly challenging circumstances, like being the president's advisor when 9/11 happened, working through this period of COVID, running a manufacturing business, is actually your imaginal skills are equally or more important than your analytical skills. But most people who are in leadership positions haven't been trained in using their imagination. But it's an important thing. I like the quote from Mark Twain, who says, the mind cannot see clearly if the eyes cannot see clearly if the mind is out of focus, and the imagination is out of focus. And so getting us to a position where we can understand the practicalities of technology, but also unleash the imagination so that you can deploy it. This is the key. So I want to give you a practical example of how this has happened during COVID. It's in a subject matter that sounds so plain, so boring. It's pizza. So this is a British company called Barrel and Stone, and it's fascinating. They created a pizza company that made pizza kits where you got all these ingredients, but you basically made the pizza on the spot. And they were selling it to pubs in the UK until COVID, and then all the pubs were closed. And so their business was dead in the water. And in 10 days, they reconfigured the whole business model. They decided instead of selling to businesses, they'd converted it to a consumer facing. So they took on one of the biggest brand names, the most well-financed brand names in the world, Domino's Pizza, and they began to challenge in that space with home delivery. It has been a massive success, and it is way outselling Domino's, and people are so excited to have the opportunity to make a pizza themselves at home with the family all stuck at home with COVID. But if anybody looked at that business model, they would have said there is no way you can convert a B2B model to a B2C and to take on this huge brand name and to do it during this lockdown. And yet it worked. And really what it is a triumph of imagination. Now I picked pizza, which is a low-tech example, because I think the same applies to high tech as well. Like, for example, in the drone space, the place that I've been in, most people ask the question, what is the drone going to deliver to me? And I keep saying to them, no. It's about delivering your eyes to the other side of the world. They are prosthetics. They're not delivery vehicles. They are about extending your sensory perception to the remote, far distant places where you happen to own a mining site or an agribusiness or something that you want to know what's going on, but you can't be there. Well, this is teleportation, right? That's really what it is. It requires robotics to do it. But this is an example of the imaginal leap that's really required. And I think this is at the core of how COVID has been affecting us all. It's forcing everybody to use their imagination more actively. And this actually is like a gift. It's a gift. And I think that we're going to see the adoption of technology is going to happen a lot faster because we unleashed our imagination, not because the technology is suddenly so much better. A lot of this tech has been around for a long time. I'll also tell you, I know most people are expecting the Great Depression Mark II, and they are totally hunkering down for a slowdown. So let me give you 3 reasons why I think we need to be getting ready for a liftoff. Number 1, we've got record amount of capital in the world economy. Every government has just put more money to work than even in the financial crisis. So we got a load of cash looking for a home. We have a wave of entrepreneurial energy as people lose their jobs, as businesses have been destroyed by COVID. There is no choice but to build something new or to come up with a new business model, to reconfigure, reconstruct, reframe, reposition, reform everything. And I believe that people will succeed at this. It feels to me almost like in a Formula One race. I can hear the engines revving. So many people are building interesting things. And the minute the green light happens, then we're going to be off to the races. So add to that the final piece, digitization, which is really what we're doing right here, right? You're not getting my atoms of reality. You're getting digital packets of electronic information conveying me to you. Well, this is a revolution. And really what we're witnessing is 10 years of digitization. That's what it should have taken, got collapsed into 3 months. And so suddenly you, in a Zoom world or whatever platform we're on, you're able to literally create something out of absolutely nothing for no cost. You're able to pull together the group we have right here that you have assembled today. I think this is going to make trade, by the way, between the UK and Sweden so much easier. The ability to establish brand presence in the other location, so much easier. And I'll add to that all of this mitigates whatever damage you might have expected from Brexit. I think that actually the British economy is going to be able to survive and thrive in this new environment far more easily than before. I know I only have a few minutes with you, and so I'm going to just say one more thing about imagination and what is the leadership task in this environment. Because so many people think of leadership as it's that person over there, it's the prime minister, it's the CEO, but it's not me, but it is you. And all of us are leaders in our own right. And we make leadership decisions every day. So I'll finish by saying what you're doing as a leader, what you're doing in making those decisions is not like hiking to Mount Everest, which is how you usually think about it. You pick a target, a sales goal, the number of voters you want to win over, the market share, whatever. You pick a static target and you go, I get the right equipment, the right team, and then I'm just going to go there. No, it's not a static target. It is like surfing, not like mountain climbing. It's like being in the open ocean where the weather's going to change all the time and the current is going to keep changing and it's sunny one moment, it's raining the next. The shadow coming towards you could be a shark, but it could be a dolphin. You don't know till it's really close. And your job is to manage all these conditions to balance on that surfboard. And remember, surfers, I grew up surfing. It's not something you do alone. Usually you're with a gang, you're with a group of people. So you, as a group, what you're doing is learning how to constantly adapt to change. And COVID has forced us all to do that much better. So I look at the tasks, the challenges in front of us, and I say we've got more money, more tools, more imagination, more capacity. And so I think we all ought to be preparing for a faster recovery, a quicker takeoff than we expected, a faster adoption of technology, which will further quicken the pace at which things are going to be happening. So I think it's a very exciting moment in history. I'm not saying it's easy, but am saying I think it may surprise us on the upside. So in the interest of not going over my time, why don't I stop there and let's see where we want to go with the questions.
Pippa, thanks. I look forward to you baking a pizza and talking more about this. Thank you. It's a very indicative story. But look, I've got one question particularly at the moment. You said right at the beginning, and I hope I'm quoting you correctly, most of leadership has not been trained in the skills needed. Where does that leave business schools and all those out there who spend $50,000 to $100,000 on going to business schools thinking that they're better prepared?
So it hasn't proved to be true. And one of the most interesting trends that I see are CEOs, particularly in America, are increasingly hiring 18-year-olds and choosing to train them in-house rather than choosing people who've been through the university and graduate school network. And part of that, too, is achieving diversity of thinking. If you want people who think differently, then they need to be trained and educated differently. And I think part of the answer is we open up the door of opportunity to a broader range of people instead of having these narrow criteria and credentials. If you don't have that, you can't play.
Okay, another question here, which is coming from Bengt Skarskum. All drugs, and he puts that in quotation marks, have side effects. In other words, all good things have side effects. Let's hope we don't discover that from the vaccines. What is the side effect of technology? In other words, you're very upbeat about what you're saying.
Well, there are dark sides and downsides to technology. If anybody hasn't watched The Social Dilemma, they need to watch it because that's at the heart of the matter of the hijacking of the mind by algorithms. And every morning you wake up, I think of myself in a constant battle, literally, like I'm having a fight with algorithms. Because if I click on one article, like once I clicked on a Meghan Markle article, so now I got like hundreds of articles about Meghan Markle, but it was an accident. So the algorithms are corralling you into a particular thought process, and you need to fight that every day.
How do you do that?
You got to look at things that are different from what you normally look at. You have to be willing to consider opinions and sources of information that normally you might disagree with. And I think that's how you fight the technology and get it to work in your favor instead of against you.
You've got over your right shoulder, The Infinite Leader. We can see several of the books stacked up there. So thanks for reminding us about that. But picking up on what you said about the 18-year-old or maybe the 20-year-old or the 21-year-old, what's your feeling, though? Because there are those within companies and institutions who say, no way we're going to do that. They're just callow. They have no experience. They're too idealistic or they're just too shallow. What's the experience that you're picking up about taking on an 18-year-old?
Well, that definitely businesses are saying they'd rather train in-house and teach them what they really need to know as opposed to what university thought they needed to know. But let me broaden this out. The fastest growing component of the labor force in all industrialized countries today are people over the age of 55. And most companies say, well, we would never hire them, but why not? They have incredible skills and knowledge, and now they're willing to be working on part-time basis. So I actually think if you want true diversity of thinking, you're going to be doing both of these things. You're going to be widening the door of opportunity to a broader range of people. And again, the Zoom phenomena, Zoom is worth more than ExxonMobil, right? Why? Because it's a great leveler, a democratizer that allows access to the workforce for people who previously were never accessible. And one should be open to that huge injection of intellectual property and energy.
Pippa, thanks very much. We're being very tight on time today. So thanks amazingly. You've got half an hour into 15 minutes. So much appreciated. I look forward to eating a pizza algorithm with you. Maybe,
excellent.
Is there an algorithm pizza you've discovered yet? Or maybe we've just invented it here for the Swedish Chamber of the Commerce in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us and nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Bye. So the technological uprising, that's what we're looking at in the last half hour. How far will it override leadership and the human ability to really both input and even control it? Listen to what Pippa was just saying. Aurora Belfrage spends her time in the intersection of artificial intelligence and international affairs. She's a tech entrepreneur, political advisor and investor. And she got columns, she's got vlogs and hosts podcasts, and she talks about the convergence of geopolitics, ethics and governance. Welcome, Aurora. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you so far for a great summit. It's been fascinating to listen to. And well, we meet digitally for obvious reasons, and though the solutions to our challenges ahead aren't as obvious. And it's been discussed in previous panels that we've embarked on a colossal transformation, financially, socially, technically, and not the least planetary. So I'm proud to moderate and facilitate this discussion, because building and catalyzing the technical foundation and fusing it with a strong moral compass, aligning tech with our ambitious sustainability development goals is a key part of success. And make no mistake, as has already been touched upon today, we are fighting for the survival of civilization and planet. So, as you'll hear, the tech community is stepping up. You will hear us talk about not only are we rethinking mobility, energy, education, housing, welfare, but sharing the leadership style and processes necessary for innovating, which several of the speakers today have touched upon as important. Because innovation doesn't appear from thin air. It needs gentle guidance, something that Lisa from Doberman talked about. And it also requires the acceptance of risk and a humble understanding of what it means to explore the unknown, which is a whole lot of dead ends and what we unfairly call failures. So without further ado, let me welcome the panel. Helene Barnekow, CEO of Microsoft Sweden, Oskar Berglund, CEO of Trustly, Humam Saknini, President of King, Richard Steiber, CEO of Good Trust. And as you're all superstars and tech celebs in your own right, we will skip the intros and dive into the juicy stuff. First question to you, Helene. Keeping in mind that you made your opening remarks just 2.5 hours ago, please kick us off, at least this panel, on your take on technology as one of the key disruptors of our time.
Yeah, no, I will not repeat my 7 minutes, so don't worry about that. I mean, just to start with that kind of perspective, right? I think we should just ground ourselves in, and all of us, not just a few who works with tech, we should all ground ourselves in the fact that we cannot achieve what we want to achieve without technology any longer. It's not possible. We cannot solve the climate issues. We cannot save the planet. We cannot have inclusive, fair, equal quality education without technology. We cannot manage our healthcare system without technology. We cannot do it without technology. And I think in terms of disruption, this is really, to me, why this is such a big, significant change right now. When I started working in technology 25 plus years ago, it wasn't pervasive in our lives. It was something that, oh my gosh, we can do mobile phones. This is so cool. And a few lucky people in this world can actually afford one. It was something which was an add-on in your life, and it created a new possibility for a few people. And where we are today, that's not the case anymore. It's pervasive to us, how we create our societies and how we create inclusive societies, actually. That to me is the fundamental part of why we need to care so much about technology today.
Thank you. And I'll come back to you because I know you also been working a lot with the intersection of technology and sustainability and put your money where your mouth is. So let's get back to that. But first, Richard, I mean, you've seen the inner workings of several of the key tech giants of this world. What are your reflections on the powers and challenges of the rise of tech and maybe AI specifically?
Yeah, I would say that there's a storm coming, and the storm is artificial intelligence, because that's going to change our society much faster and much more fundamentally than we ever can imagine. And I think what we're starting to see is that jobs are being taken over by robots who basically do mechanical work for us. We will start to see AI taking over decision jobs. So we're already starting to see customer service being displaced by bots. Very quickly, our traders buying and selling shares are going to is already replaced by AI. I think that all the tedious stuff that we will do, Google, Siri, Alexa, they will help us and manage our lives, booking meetings and restaurant. They're going to take over our lives, which means that education needs to fundamentally change, because the jobs that we're being trained for today, they are not here tomorrow. So there are a lot of things that's going to be changing. And I do think that, the way we interact with computers today today, pretty through a phone or for a computer using a keyboard and mouse is a very highly inefficient communication medium, because Google would know that we are looking for Amazon. We just type A and they know it's Amazon. So it's a very inefficient way. So I think there will be new ways of spatial computing where you use AI, AR and VR to interact with computers in a completely new way. So there's a storm coming and we're not ready for it.
Richard, a storm implies that it's negative. Is that how you feel?
Yes, in this case, yes.
And I guess we have another 24 minutes to maybe create some solutions of how to make that a positive and something to live with. But first, let me allow Humam into the conversation, because an integral part of any tech discussion will be data and thereby insights. And that's something that you work a lot with your users. And I was wondering if you could bring to this conversation how you look at data and the insights it's given to you about the challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the theme alongside of all of technology is the use of data, and it spans a very wide gamut of everything you can imagine, anything from how it touches privacy with end users all the way to how you use it. I think like everything in technology and everything that is consumer-centric, really the answer is always in the balance. I think we've, as companies, have indexed with this incredible wealth of data that was available with the advent of mobile devices and kind of this wave of technology that will continue. But I think kind of true insight comes from the balance of how you use not just big data, but very small data. I think there's a counterbalance going on right now to not just index on this massive amount of computational data ability that companies can have to think about algorithms and think about predictability. But I think kind of how do you balance that with the right insight of a single, player need or a single consumer need? So I think kind of as we get more complex and more kind of data centric, I think we'll only find our way again once we couple that back with some really traditional insights of understanding human behavior. And I think kind of it's on us and as all companies as to be insightful, but not creepy. Like we need to really understand our players. We really need to understand our consumers to be really player centric, but you can't be creepy. You can't be in a place where you're kind of doing things that, to what Pippa was saying, just makes people feel like, why are you serving me this thing up? What do you know about me? You can't cross the line. So I think we have to really kind of adopt balance as a technology community.
And it's a fascinating point, because it sounds very banal when you say we shouldn't be creepy. Of course not. But who decides what's creepy? And as Helene was saying, the goalpost has moved. The market has changed. We look at tech differently now, and it's a moving train. How do you assess your own non-creepiness, Humam?
I think, I think you have to ask yourself the questions of, what do you do with data? What are you using it for? And how do you make, everything better for your players? Like, I think to understand how to serve them better. But like, it feels, companies have had to struggle with moral issues and ethical issues all their life. Data is just one of those. It's just like, we can't park that when it comes to technology and data just because it's available. So I think typically, like if you're using it for the good of the game and it feels like it's one of many things that you're developing, that's typically where you're there. But we have explicit conversations of, does it fit with our values? Does it fit with what we're trying to do? And is this really the right thing for the users? But in general, it's also kind of making sure that you don't get too carried away with one discipline of data.
Okay, so reading between the lines, you have some sort of tool and framework to assess that you are still within the realm of non-creepy. We'll keep you to that.
I personally find that when I talk to players myself, I get a lot of insights. So typically it's not about algorithms. So,
which is an insight in itself, that you need human involvement, not only data. Oscar, please join the conversation and add the layer of the financial market, which is obviously also a fundamental part of any conversation about society at large. And maybe more importantly, how do you see technology shifting within the financial transactions and financial markets?
Well, I think that there's one thing about financial companies and fintechs that I think we kind of elaborate or develop into big tech or tech more generally. So we've spoken about, and Helen mentioned the fact that you can't avoid technology today. There are many large companies that become very powerful. And I think the flip side of that coin is regulation. And so I think increasingly we'll see regulators taking interest in these companies. And it's interesting if you look at kind of the US, Congress has probably called into, called the Zuckerbergs and Bezos out there into Congress to testify multiple times now. But so far there haven't really been any change in regulation or the kind of legislative framework. But then interesting thing happened, I think on the eve of the US presidential election, when in China, you had China's probably biggest fintech and financial planning to go public, listing in Shanghai and Hong Kong. And it was a massive IPO. And at the day before they were going to price and start, the shares going to start trade, the IPO got pulled because the Chinese regulator has suddenly announced that they're going to change completely the regulatory framework. And that's going to put a big dent into Ant Financial's earnings. So they had to pull the whole IPO. And this was done in a matter of weeks, right? The Chinese were very quick in doing this. And I think that's maybe, I don't think it's going to happen that quick in other places of the world. But it's going to put, it may set a precedent in one way of just regulators taking increasingly more aggressive steps to regulate not only fintechs, but also other tech companies. And I think that's kind of natural given the power some of these companies are getting. I think that's going to be a theme going forward. And coming back to Richard's points on AI, again, it's just a matter of when regulation will catch up. Maybe never, but it's going to try to catch up at least for, in the very near future.
And Richard, if I ask you to comment on that, because if we're talking about some sort of perfect storm, and you were, or not perfect storm, a storm, and you were mentioning jobs market changing, and if we add a layer of regulation that is always by definition playing catch up, how do you see that working? How do we marry these things instead of just saying regulation will never catch up?
No, I agree. Regulation will probably never catch up at the speed of superintelligence, clearly, because politicians may not have superintelligence yet. But I do think that if companies have the opportunity to displace costly labor or use intelligence to increase their profits, then they will do so. In the 1950s, we were 2-3 billion people on this planet. Today we're approaching 8 billion people. So in the past 70 years, we increased quite a lot. And I don't see that changing, which means there will going to be more and more people. We're probably spending at least half of our time online today. But is there going to be work for us, all of us, if the computer is essentially doing things for us? And the answer is probably no. So then the question is, what are we going to do with all those people? And typically taxes and things like that has been used to, fund education and fund other things. But if those things go to profit for companies, then, the government is not going to have that. So then probably what they need to do, there've been some proposal that you'll have the robot tax, for example, that if you displace the worker with a robot, then there will be some tax because otherwise society will collapse. So yes, there are a lot of different things that regulation and politicians need to think about because the old way of thinking is not working anymore.
And many philosophers today are thinking about what is the definition of work, and maybe there's an opportunity to broaden that. And tying into what you were speaking about, Helene, in your opening remarks about diversity and inclusion, maybe there is something here that's interesting in terms of how men and women traditionally have worked, how we consider taking care of the home and children being part of this complex spider web of mega trends that are changing everything. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that web of megatrends, but I definitely no. I think there's so many aspects to that, and you're talking men and women, and you talk about what society you're creating, and if you talk about inclusion, I think, and you connect that with technologies, and we see actually part of this now in this endless work from home situation we've ended up in, which actually has a great inclusion benefit to it. And even if some people preached that before we went into crisis, nobody could really believe it. But there is actually a really good inclusion benefit. We see both women managing, on that topic or question, many women who have taken more responsibility for children and at home, etc., and dropping and picking up, etc. They find this is now actually their lives are working. You look at people not having to live in the big cities to come and do whether it's a development course or it's another training or something, you don't have to travel anywhere any longer. So it doesn't matter if you live in the deepest forest in Sweden up north, you can still get access to all these things because everything is digital anyway. And this is part of my thinking in terms of that it's pervasive now, right? It's already pervasive, and it will get more, like Richard was saying, but it is pervasive. And yes, that will change and I think neutralize many of the aspects. Now, if you connect that though to some of the challenges that we have to I think really address in our leadership, there is, for example, the point on skilling. We know that it's not even the word education, because it's people need to reskill all the time and refill on their skilling all the time. And how do we make that accessible? We know that in Sweden, we work with areas of Sweden where they have very little access to advanced technology, whereas you're in other areas where it's plenty of it. So how do we use that also being as part of the fabric, so you can have access to this? Because if you have access to that, you can actually influence how society develops, the companies, of course, but also actually society. And without it, you would be excluded. So it's a very big topic, I think, Aurora. And this comes back, and I think, Humam, you spoke about it really well, and connecting it to what I said this morning or this afternoon about leadership. I do think one of the most important things in leadership going forward is that you actually, as a leader, combine being tech-driven and value-driven. Because you cannot ignore technology, even if you are not the CTO or CIO or CDO. You have to understand what tech can do for you and your ecosystem and your employees and your customers. And we have to put values into it. Otherwise, anything can happen with this technology. So to me, that's really the coin I want to get to.
We're touching upon some huge topics here, and we won't solve any of them. But I think it's interesting that the technology conversation quickly dives into both some sort of ethics and the creepiness and the policy regulation, and what does that mean for the workforce. And I think one of the things that might be interesting to touch upon briefly is that the responsibility of technology companies? They've given us this big topic today to discuss, and they've asked tech companies to come and talk about it, the impact on society at large. Is that our responsibility? Humam, how do you see it?
I think these are really large topics, and I think there's always the impulse to look at the very negative implications of technology. I think people have been talking about the societal implications of technology ever since we've had any kind of technology, because it always displaces something. So I think they are important topics to really think about, because the shifts have become very radical, like displacement of workforce and all that stuff. But I just before I answer your question, I just want to say, like, technology could be an incredible enabler of good. Like, basically the value creation, the wealth creation, not for the few, but for the many. If you think about countries that could actually leapfrog in terms of ability to have talent, like the work from home environment has taught us that you can access talent anywhere in the world. That idea that we have to have somebody relocate to Stockholm just because they want to work at my company, is a thing that we don't have to always talk about and think about. So that creates more opportunities for talent everywhere that with mobility might have been an issue for them. I think companies have a duty to abide by their values. If you are a very value-driven company, you attract the best talent, and you attract, player and customer loyalty over a long time, and you become very, very sustainable. But you got to be true to that. I think I think it's a bit tough to ask any company, no matter how big it is, to think about all of society or big parts of society. I think we need to engage in the conversation. But I think kind of what you'll see is that the companies that have gone through long periods of time, even big companies that have gone trials and tribulations about their place in society, have typically only survived by having a very clear value proposition to their customers and to their employees. And if when you do that, you're solving a big problem and you're being part of the solution. And then all the things on the boundaries around what the politicians and the policies are trying to guard against, that becomes part of that ecosystem. But I think that's there. And I think the ones that don't have those values-driven mandates, typically, I think they might profit for a short period of time, but I do think that they don't last much long in the grand scheme of things.
And that's obviously something that all the panels today have touched upon, which is the responsibility, what can we do, and the leadership around that. How are we in practice operationally delivering on these things? And Oscar, from your perspective, you obviously are part of this some sort of transformational change and the big buzzwords around that. And COVID on top of it, people feel maybe a larger sense of community and change. How does that change your leadership? Has that strengthened your values? How do people talk about their contribution in the same way?
It's interesting. I was quite concerned when COVID hit and everyone went home, started working for me. I was concerned about productivity. I was concerned about culture and the teams being able to stay as one and do the job well. I've been positively surprised. I think productivity-wise, things are going pretty well. I think that goes for most companies that have gone through these couple of months or these last 9-12 months. I think from a kind of culture point of view, the jury is still out there because if we're going to have this another year or so, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think a lot of the kind of maintained high spirit has to a large extent probably been driven by the fact that we made a lot of investment into that before. And then I think as a leader, communication has probably become even more essential. Communication was always very important. But, in terms of just having people being, making sure that they're up to date, where they don't get the daily, chat about the coffee shop and having lunch with friends or with colleagues. I think so yeah, I think anyone, including myself, I had to take make an even bigger investment into communicating to the employees and the teams.
So that's all good there. Yeah, Richard, your comment on that?
Yeah, no, I just find it fascinating because, when I worked at Google, we were probably one of the first companies to bring people together. The engineers were talking to the marketing people, were talking to the content people, and you had this serendipity of exchange in these sort of open campuses. And then I remember when I came home to Stockholm in 2013, and we started all these co-working spaces with SAP 46 and Epicenter, and we were all going to work together. And now we're all sort of the opposite of that. And I always find that creativity loves constraint. So if this is the new constraint, we will figure it out. But one of the things I think is that certain leaders will be better at managing and steering their organization in this sort of distributed organization style. And some are not going to manage that. So what's going to happen is that some companies will actually move ahead faster now because it works really well for them, and they're using technology. They can communicate through these kind of mediums and using Slack and whatever the tools they're using. Whereas other companies who kind of relied on people coming into the office, getting the clock and having sort of walking the floor kind of leadership will not be as successful. I think the other thing that's going to happen is is that people are going to realize that, hey, why do I need an office? Why do I really need all these people here? And why do they need to be in London or Stockholm? So I think we're going to see a new wave where people are actually, they're not laying off people now because it's kind of inappropriate to do during COVID days, but they are going to restructure. They are going to restructure as we move into next year. And also, you don't need to pay the London and Stockholm salaries, or where I am in Silicon Valley. you're going to have someone who's living in the forest, that you said, who's completely different salary. So I think there are huge changes coming from this sort of pandemic that we talked about video conferencing, how that's going to change, since the 90s, but it's happening now.
I mean,
so I'm interpreting that as a silver lining to the storm. Is that right, Richard?
Yes, it's another storm.
It's another storm. Kumam, what's your take on the storm?
Go ahead.
No, I would just say we need to make it interesting. So I'm taking a point of view to push you a little bit.
I just think somebody told me once, pandemics only accelerate trends, that doesn't create new ones. So it's basically, we've been talking about flexible workplace forever. I think it's just most companies have been too afraid to try it. And we just had the most natural A/B experiment of our 100 years where we were all forced to understand if we can be productive, not going into the office day in and day out. Guess what's going to happen? Our employees are going to demand a very different environment. We're in a talent-based industries where you need to be employee-driven, and employees will tell you what they want. And the days, I think offices are useful, but they're hyper-collaborative environments where people can go in there. But when you're executing, you could be remote. But the idea that you go commute for half an hour to get into Stockholm or London or Barcelona, only to stand at an office next to someone you don't have to talk to, that sounds silly now that we've been a year not doing that.
Helena, I'm going to bring you in and comment on that. But I also want you to mention, because I've seen you live with your colleagues, so I know how important that is in your leadership style. So I want you to also address the sustainability stuff that you're doing after.
Okay, I just feel like I need to make a quick comment to this. We set a target a few years ago. I don't know how many years now, 3, 4. It was before I joined Microsoft in Sweden, to say that work is something we do, not a place we go to. So we moved offices. Aurora, you've been to our new beautiful offices in Regeringsgatan, and I couldn't have everybody coming in. It would be impossible. We set up an office consciously that doesn't have. You cannot all sit there and do emails on one day. And 75% of the office space is actually open for customers or partners or you. If you want to come and have a coffee with me when the pandemic is over, you can stay and work there after. Because the whole idea is to, exactly to your point, why would anybody get in a car, drive for an hour and a half to do the same thing in the office that they can do at home? How can we even be stuck in such a mentality, which is, for me, is from the Taylorism or something? You needed to clock somebody when we have all the tools. So we are well on that way. And I think after this pandemic, most people also have the technical tools. Some of them didn't, but it's not just that. It actually comes back to leadership and culture. It is how we're comfortable leading in that environment and the culture we have, and keeping people together and meeting up for the right purposes. But I'm very passionate about this. So you want me to mention something about sustainability as well, Aurora?
I will not have done my job. We haven't talked about tech as a disruptor of society at large without addressing sustainability. And so you get the only one-liner around that.
The one-liner. No, I think the super important, you asked about, do we have a responsibility as tech companies? And I definitely think we have a big responsibility as tech companies, especially platform companies like ourselves. To just give a super quick idea of that, in January, we communicated our sustainability goals, which is to by 2030 be carbon negative, climate positive, by 2050 to take back everything we have emitted in the atmosphere since Microsoft was started in 1975. And of course, nobody knows how to do that yet. So there's a climate innovation fund of $1 billion that we work with partners, startups, different companies to actually go and solve for this. And I think large companies who can and who have tech have to take responsibilities in different areas like this. It's my personal view.
Lovely. And that will be the final point. And to conclude, we're going to be non-creepy. We're going to take our responsibility. We're going to address climate change. Leadership and humility is essential. There's no room for complacency. There's a storm, Richard, talking about maybe 2 storms. There might be some silver linings. This might have been an inspiring, might have been an entertaining conversation, but I assure you, this is not a nice to have. Getting this right, failing fast, investing strategically in technology for a sustainable society is of essence and urgent. No one can do everything, everyone can do something. Thank you from us.
Thank you, Aurora, and thank you very much indeed to the panel. So there's a very clear theme and spine of argument emerging, which Aurora has just summarized brilliantly after 3.5 hours. Have you been thinking outer enough? Let's try and pull together some of the threads then on what has been achieved, what the takeaways are to take off with after these 3.5 hours. Let's go to a hugely experienced diplomat at the Swedish Foreign Ministry, Olof Skog, who's now the head of delegation of the European Union at the United Nations. Olof, welcome. You're joining us from New York City. You've got about 7 minutes. Try and summarize the mood that we can take away from this before we bring it to an end.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Greetings from a crisp and sunny New York. I wanted to start with a quote, Nick, and I will disappoint you. It's not a Churchill quote, I'm afraid. It's something completely different. We humans are more closely related to the cod than the cod is related to the shark. I want you to keep that thought in your massive brains for a while, and I'll try to come back to why I mentioned that particular quote later on. You've had a fascinating discussion with some of the leading and most visionary representatives from what may well be the two most globally advanced economies in the world, the United Kingdom and Sweden. And if the world were made up of countries like the UK and Sweden, or if the two of us were able to lead the world, I'm sure the world will be such a much better place. I say that very conscious of the problems and difficulties that both countries have gone through lately. But remember that Sweden and UK belong to a very small group of countries that have ways to deal with the pandemic that most other countries in the world would die for. Social security nets, well-equipped hospitals, access to financial assets, reserves and credits, cheap loans, but also respect for rule of law, free media, independent courts, taxes that find their way to finance institutions that basically serve the interest of the citizens, regular and fair elections that give us the possibility to throw out those who govern us when we tire of them or when they are seen to be tired of us. I wouldn't want to darken the outlook because I think to the extent that I've been able to listen in over the 3 hours that you've discussed this morning, it's a generally positive outlook out there. And it's been encouraging to listen to. Stock markets are going through the roof and the vaccine seems to be around the corner. And I will not, therefore, comment further on Brexit, just to say that in the broader global context where I operate on a daily basis, the European Union and the UK, whatever happens, will stay very close together as we think alike on basically all the major issues that are on the international agenda. So it is a real privilege to speak here today, and it's also a privilege to represent the European Union, I have to say, in the foremost global conversation there is, namely the United Nations. The UN is really a unique platform for having that global conversation, and although we don't always agree with every other player here in New York, at least the conversation is going on, and it is, I'll tell you, every diplomat's wet dream to have the possibility to run into the 193 countries that make up the UN on a daily basis. And part of my job is to keep 27 states together, the 27 countries that make up the European Union. And that, you can lose sleep over that. But I have to say that taking the bigger view, the voice of the European Union is much needed right now, I think. The EU is a power that stands up for, the common sense, respecting agreements, international rules-based order, peacefully resolving differences for the respect of human rights, democracy, and free trade. We've understood that effective international cooperation provides the predictability that everyone needs, and it's the only way to deal with the issues that are too big for the nation state to resolve by itself. And this is important, we also understand that investing in and engaging with the developing world, the fight against poverty and for dignity for others is, in the end, a fundamental part of our own enlightened self-interest. I will not dwell on the pandemic, but just take it as a starting point. The toll it has taken globally is absolutely horrendous. You don't want to be reminded of the numbers of the greatest economic downfall since the Great Depression, the social cost, the trillions, the millions who've been pushed back into extreme poverty and who are added to the already millions that go hungry every day. And one of the tougher aspects of serving here in the UN is that you're constantly tormented by the reality of the world outside Sweden and the United Kingdom. Human rights abuse, gender-based domestic violence, humanitarian catastrophes, conflicts, and whatnot. And of course, the pandemic has made much of the positive trends that we saw last year have, eradicated them. So we're in a pretty dire situation. But it's also, I think, the pandemic has revealed many things that are actually repairable. Our interdependency. No one is safe anywhere unless everyone is safe everywhere. This is true of the pandemic, but it's also true for all other crises, like nuclear arms, climate change, mass migration. So when our neighbor goes into lockdown, our economy goes down, even if we remain open. The former Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, once said to the then Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, that when your neighbor is a big country, it's like sharing bed with an elephant. When he, the elephant, turns at night, it doesn't matter if the intentions are good or bad, because you get squeezed no matter what. He was, of course, thinking the US, neighboring Canada, and for Olof Palme, this was about the Soviet Union bear neighboring Sweden. And it's not just among neighbors. When we stop flying here in the UK or Sweden, Barbados and Fiji on the other side of the globe heads towards bankruptcy, even if they didn't have a single COVID case. So if we can't live without each other, we have to learn to live with each other. And walls will not fix these particular problems. That's how interconnected we are. The pandemic has also revealed the glaring inequalities inside countries and between countries. The amount of people without jobs or in the informal sector completely unprotected, also in very rich countries. The gap between the haves and the have-nots have increased. And as we know, that is neither morally, politically, nor economically viable in the long run. But it has also taught us that when facing an acute and present danger, and maybe this is my most important message, the virus in this case, we're able to take some pretty drastic measures in response. I was in New York at the peak of the pandemic here, when New York was the epicenter in April. And if someone would have told me or anyone else 2 months before that JFK would close, all restaurants would shutter and Broadway would close down, and that before the end of the year, we, the Western economies, would have poured trillions of euros into our economies just to keep afloat, everyone would have thought you were nuts. Of course, we should have done much better in preventing the virus and its spread and its massive economic and social effects. But the issue now is also, can we use this crisis as a means to prevent similar crises and, more importantly, in the future, to build back better? The immediate thing, of course, is the vaccine and to ensure that the vaccine is available for everyone in the world. But it would be, I think, a huge underachievement if that would be it. This is the opportunity to accelerate into a much more democratic and inclusive way of looking at how the main public goods are distributed throughout the world. It's a disgrace, I think, that we've been unable to feed everyone and to put all children to school around the world. Well, now we understand that not doing so is not safe for us either. It's fantastic that we found water on the moon recently, but honestly, do we not have the knowledge, the resources, and the political will to provide development and decent living conditions, including clean water, to all living also on this planet? Sometimes it takes a real good crisis to get things done the right way. Maybe this is the Churchill quote, I'm not sure. But anyway, so let's try real hard to see the opportunities. And let's see this as a wake-up call. Looking forward, it's not the pandemic that represents the worst challenge. It's consider global climate change. Tipping points, when we reach a point of no return, when the things that were holding back the worst case scenarios start dwindling and actually accelerate in the wrong direction. We're very close on some planetary boundaries. To climate change, there's no vaccine. Consider biodiversity loss. I've been listening to the calm and measured voice of David Attenborough recently, reading from his book, Life on Earth. And he mentioned the fact that I just asked you to keep in mind, that we are closer as human beings. We're closely related to the cod than the cod is related to the shark. And the point of that, I think, is that all life is connected. And we're interdependent. Our life is dependent on all other life on Earth. And there's some pretty scary creatures out there, from electric eels to poisonous frogs and whatnot. But the most dangerous and scary species of all is, of course, us, the humans. We're perfectly capable of destroying ourselves and the planet. And in many ways, we're actually doing that. But we're also capable, and that's unique to humans, to rethink, to draw some lessons, and to change course. Public pressure, I think now, importantly, has started to turn things around. The EU is leading carbon neutrality ambitions by 2050. China has made a very significant announcement recently, and we're still trying to gather exactly what that means. UK, Japan, South Korea, and of course the new administration coming in soon in the US, all are joining this bandwagon. It seems now that there's a race to be best in class rather than the other way around. And the understanding that this is not only necessary, but actually a tremendous economic opportunity is gaining ground. And that will make those countries that refuse to see fossils as fossils and not as fuels lose, I think, also markets moving forward. So the technological revolution to resolve all this holds tremendous economic possibilities. The new economy is one of innovation and creativity. Sustainability is not an additional cost or a burden, it's a possibility. And there is huge untapped potential here. And again, Sweden and UK are in a pole position to reap the benefits, I think. Digitalization, A1, and artificial intelligence, 5G, all of that is fantastic. But in our family, hells break loose if the Wi-Fi goes down a couple of minutes. But consider that half of the world's population don't have access to the internet at all. Isn't it fantastic when you consider how the digital revolution, if correctly managed, can release and empower all that potential? And the real revolution is, of course, to provide reasonable access to all everywhere, so that health, education can be accessible to all people of the world. The equality revolution, women's participation in the economy, is one of the most obvious and less utilized reserves for economic growth. We worry where the next global economic revolution is going to come. Well, look no further. Full gender equality in the EU alone would generate 10% increase in GDP by 2050. Intergenerational justice, and I'm coming to the end here. We're all current decision makers. You would not have been invited to this event if you were not. How far does our responsibility reach? What justice can the next generation ask from us? How do we want to be remembered? The tired generation of greed, or the one that finally, 5 minutes to 12, understood that we will be held to account? And the private sector has an enormous role to play. It's one of the most encouraging things in my job here in New York, is to observe how companies traveling to New York don't just go to see the market opportunities, but they also want to visit the UN to understand what their role as investors, employers, pension fund holders, global citizens, and ultimately human beings can be. And we are moving very rapidly away, ladies and gentlemen, from this corporate social responsibility notion that you shouldn't do no harm or you should be aware of your footprint. That's not good enough. We need to be part of the change. The young talent that you want to recruit will be asking you how you incorporate the 2030 agenda, the Paris goals, your policy on racial discrimination, and your strategy on gender equality. Everything we do during and after this crisis must be with the focus of building more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient to pandemics, climate change, and other challenges of global nature. And the private sector has an obvious part. Integrate 2030 agenda into your business models, scale up investments to areas that are hardest hit, advocate for strong, serious, coordinated international codes and financial regulations, and encourage rating agencies to incorporate sustainable development considerations into their decision-making. So I will disappoint you again and not end with a quote from Churchill, but one from my own son, Samuel. Let's wake up and smell the coffee. Thank you very much.
Olof Skog, thank you very much indeed. The coffee coming from New York City, from the head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations. Let me just emphasize a couple of things that he said. We're close to the planetary limits. The most scariest are us humans. He emphasized the imperative for multilateralism and the positivism and opportunities that is emerging and can still emerge. And he said, walls will not fix problems. It's been an extraordinary 3.5 hours. Thank you for letting me be part of it and to guide you through it, to make sure that everyone kept to time, and also we had a great drive and energy. But really the reflection needs to come from the chair of the Swedish Chamber, from the CEO of the Nordics at Deutsche Bank, Jan Olsson, who joins us from Stockholm. Jan, the final word is yours.
Nick Gowing, what a moderator you are. You are just fantastic, second to none. So thank you very, very much for chairing it, Nick. You were outstanding. You did an outstanding job here throughout the day, and it was very, very interesting to listen to you as a moderator and to all the other panelists and speakers. What a group we have put together here. What interesting thoughts. It was really, really groundbreaking. This Outer Thinking seminar is something for the future and has also done a lot, hopefully, for the British-Swedish relationship. So very, very well done. I would like to thank the sponsors, and there have been many, and in no particular order here, is Jämtland Härjedalen, a fantastic region to visit. Then we have the fantastic company Trustly and Payments. We have Volvo Cars, and also Swedish Match, all truly interesting companies and regions. And we hope to see a lot of you in the future, but we really thank you for sponsoring this, because we know that it is not always easy to find the funds, and you also provided many interesting speakers at a very, very senior level. So thank you very, very much for that. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our many partners. The British-Swedish Chamber of Commerce, of course, the Department of International Trade, and the Embassy of Sweden, and last but not least, the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, which I chair, and we have a very interesting board, many interesting people on the board. And then we have, of course, the executive leadership under Peter Sundberg, who's relentless in putting together this seminar and many others. So thank you, Peter. And then we go to Matilda Börjesson and her team for organizing this event. She's been in touch with all of us on a constant basis for several months now. Thank you very, very much. And then the technical crew headed by Andy and his team. Very, very well done, because we know it's not very easy to connect to New York, London, Stockholm, and many other places here on the internet. Very well done, and thank you very, very much. Then I would also like to remind you that we will have another seminar of this kind, another Outer Thinking seminar in 2021, so in 2021, on the 2nd of December. Please note that, 2nd of December 2021, there will be another seminar. But now I would like to conclude with saying thank you very, very much. We really appreciated all the work. In the name of all my colleagues on the board of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, and in the name of the whole management team, I would like to say thank you, well done, and hope to see all of you in the future. The panelists and speakers were outstanding. Thank you for the support, and bye-bye. And Nick, bye-bye.
wearing a seatbelt is a terrible idea.
Hey, it's a terrible, terrible idea. They're calling it a violation of human rights.
For me, it saved my life. That wasn't the day to die, basically.
Have you seen my Zen can?
Nope, haven't seen it.
Houston, we have a problem.